Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another scary story. Your place where we uncover the darkest mysteries in a calming and reflective way. For the next hour, I want you to put on your earphones, put your phone face down, and close your eyes. Relax, and let this story take you to a world full of chills and mystery. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, leave a comment sharing where in the world you're listening from. Now get comfortable and relax. The wind was always cold in Fells Hollow. Even in the summer when it should have been warm, there was something about the place that made it feel like winter never really left. I'd heard about it for years from hikers passing through, but it wasn't until I came across the old history books at the local library that I knew just how strange the place had really been. In 1932, the entire mining community vanished without a trace. The stories were as bizarre as they were chilling. People sitting down for dinner one moment only to be gone the next. No signs of struggle, no bodies, just nothing. Tables were set, food was warm, but every single mirror in town had been shattered. The only clue they left behind was a diary found in the schoolhouse, its last entry written by a child named Emma Carter. Mr. Shade says we have to go with him. Now he's been watching from the trees for so long. Search parties combed through the area for weeks, but there was no sign of anyone. No footprints, no bodies, no nothing. Only empty homes and shattered glass. I couldn't get it out of my mind. The thought that something or someone could just erase a whole town like that. I tried to shake it off, but the more I read, the more I found myself fascinated. How could an entire town just disappear? It didn't make sense. I started spending more time in the library, finding everything I could about the old mining town, even tracking down some old photographs. What struck me was the trees, the pines. They stood tall in almost every picture, looming over the old wooden houses. Something about them gave me a chill, as though they were watching, waiting for something to happen. The more I thought about it, the more I realized there was something off about the whole thing. Maybe it was the strange history. Maybe it was the way the trees had stood tall in every photo, always watching, always waiting. And what about this Mr. Shade? Was he real? Had he been the cause of all this? I knew I had to go. I had to see it for myself. I had to understand what happened to Fells Hollow. What could possibly make an entire town vanish overnight, and what was the connection to those trees? So I packed my gear, booked a campsite at the nearby Blackwater Bend, and planned my trip. I was ready, or at least I thought I was. What I didn't expect was to find that the trees had been waiting for me too. I arrived at Blackwater Bend campground late in the afternoon. The air was thick with the smell of pine and damp earth, a mix that made my skin tingle. The campground was nearly empty, only a couple of tents set up in the distance, which gave the whole place a remote, eerie feeling. The site I'd booked, site number 13, was tucked away deep in the woods, far from the main trail. The perfect spot if you wanted to be alone. I set up my tent in silence, the only sound coming from the occasional bird call or the rustling of leaves in the breeze. It wasn't until the sun dipped below the horizon that the feeling of unease started to creep in. The woods around me seemed quieter than I remembered. No crickets, no rustling in the underbrush, just the low hum of the wind through the trees. Made a small fire and sat by it for a while, trying to settle my nerves. The flames flickered and danced, casting strange shadows across the ground. I tried to focus on the warmth, on the smell of burning wood, but every now and then, I caught a glimpse of something moving just beyond the trees. Something tall and dark, just at the edge of my vision. I told myself it was nothing, probably just the shadows playing tricks on me. But as the night deepened, the feeling of being watched grew stronger. I couldn't shake the sensation that someone, or something, was standing just out of sight, observing me. I kept glancing around, my heart pounding in my chest, but I saw nothing. It wasn't until I got up to tend to the fire that I first saw him. Between two towering pines, there was a figure. At first, I thought it was another camper, Someone out for a midnight walk, perhaps. But the figure didn't move. It was standing perfectly still, just watching me. I squinted, trying to make out the details, but the figure was a silhouette, taller than any person I'd ever seen, nearly 7 feet. And it was so dark, almost, like it was absorbing the moonlight around it, like it was made from shadows themselves. My stomach churned. I felt a cold sweat break out along my neck. There was something deeply wrong about this thing, something that made every instinct in my body scream that I needed to leave, that I needed to get away. But I didn't. I stood frozen, my eyes locked, on the figure as it remained motionless. Then something strange happened. The figure's head tilted sideways, in a grotesque, unnatural way, as if it had noticed me staring. And for the first time, I felt like it knew I was watching. The thing didn't move, not right away. But in that instant, I felt the temperature drop, the air growing thick and heavy as if the woods themselves were holding their breath. Then, my GPS went crazy. My phone buzzed in my pocket, but when I pulled it out, the screen was flooded with notifications, 37 new messages, all from a number I didn't recognize. I opened one of them and my heart nearly stopped. The message read, "What are you doing here, Ryan?" I checked the timestamp. The message was from 1932. I looked up from my phone and the figure was gone. I didn't move for a few minutes, too stunned to process what had just happened. I checked the trees again, scanning the area where the silhouette had been, but there was nothing. Only the dark emptiness of the woods. I don't know how long I stood there staring at the shadows, trying to make sense of it. The fire was still crackling weakly, the only sound breaking the silence. I tried to push the fear down, telling myself it was nothing more than my imagination. But deep down I knew that wasn't true. Something had been watching me. And whatever it was still out there. I went back to my tent that night, but sleep didn't come easily. The wind howled through the trees, and every now and then, I thought I heard something else. A low whisper, like a voice carried on, the breeze. It didn't make sense, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it was speaking directly to me. I told myself I would go to bed, wake up in the morning, and chalk it all up to the isolation, to the way the woods play tricks on your mind. But the night stretched on, and I couldn't escape the feeling that something was still out there, waiting for me to make a mistake. I heard it again, faint at first, 3 knocks, one after the other, coming from the tree line. And this time, I wasn't sure if I could tell myself it was just my mind playing tricks anymore. I didn't sleep that night. It wasn't the cold, although the temperature had dropped significantly, far more than I'd expected. It was the constant, nagging feeling that I wasn't alone. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined the silhouette from earlier, lurking, just outside the reach of the firelight. I couldn't shake the image of that tall, dark figure standing between the pines, watching me. My heart was a constant thrum in my chest, every creak of the trees above me a reminder that something was out there. When dawn finally came, I was too exhausted to think straight. I crawled out of my tent, blinking against the bright light, hoping the sunlight would somehow ease the tension in my chest. The fire had burned low, the embers just a faint glow now. The morning air was cool, and I could see my breath in the chill. I hadn't realized just how cold it had gotten overnight. The woods were still quiet, too quiet. I forced myself to make coffee, my hand shaking slightly as I fumbled with the stove. Every so often I'd glance around, half expecting to see that same figure watching me from the trees. But there was nothing. The woods looked normal, calm even, other than the unnatural silence that still lingered, settling over me like a heavy fog. I tried to brush off the unease. After all, I was a seasoned hiker. I'd been to remote campsites before, spent nights in places much more isolated than this. But this felt different. I couldn't put my finger on it, but the air felt thick with something I couldn't see. And the memories of last night, of the figure, the weird messages on my phone, the knocks from the trees, kept playing in my mind, looping over and over. By mid-morning, I decided to take a walk. Maybe if I got some distance from the campsite, I could clear my head. I packed a light bag, water, snacks, a map, and my camera, and set off down the trail that wound around the campsite. I needed to stretch my legs and think. The path was narrow, bordered by dense forest on both sides. The pines loomed overhead, their long, thick branches swaying in the breeze, casting strange shadows that seemed to move of their own accord. I kept my head down, focusing on the ground beneath me. My mind was spinning, and I wanted to clear it, but then I heard something. It was subtle at first, a soft whisper like a voice carried on the wind. I stopped dead in my tracks, straining to hear. The sound wasn't clear, but it felt wrong. Like it was coming from behind me, but also from all around me at once. Ryan. The voice was low, almost a hiss, and it was unmistakably my name. My stomach twisted, and I turned around, my heart thudding in my chest. But there was nothing. The trail behind me was empty, just trees and shadows. I looked around frantically, expecting to see something, anything, but there was only the silence of the woods. I tried to rationalize it. It could have been an animal, the wind, maybe even the sound of my own footsteps echoing back to me. But it didn't feel like any of those things. The voice, if it even was a voice, had felt deliberate, like it was trying to get my attention, trying to lure me in. I shook it off and kept walking, though now with a heightened sense of awareness. The whispers kept coming, softer this time, but persistent. Ryan, come closer. I ignored it. The last thing I needed was to lose my grip on reality out here. The silence between the whispers seemed to stretch longer, like I was being pulled deeper into something, and I didn't know what it was or how to escape it. By the time I reached the end of the trail, I realized I hadn't been paying attention to where I was going. I looked around, confused. The forest had changed subtly, the trees becoming denser, the underbrush thicker. The trail had somehow shifted. I couldn't remember seeing this part of the woods before. I checked my map, but it didn't match up with anything I recognized. The landmarks on it were all wrong. In fact, I couldn't even find the trail I had just walked. A wave of panic began to rise in my chest. The whispers came again, now louder, more urgent. Ryan, why did you leave? You don't have to leave. I whirled around, my heart racing. But there was no one. No shadow. No movement. Just the trees swaying in the wind. I started walking faster, hoping to find some trace of the familiar trail. But the deeper I went into the woods, the more disoriented I became. Everything felt like it was closing in on me. The trees seemed to grow taller, darker. The air grew colder, and my breath came out in jagged gasps. The whispers grew into something more, a low growl, a distant scratching sound that seemed to echo from all directions. It felt as though the very woods themselves were closing in around me. Then I saw something, a figure, standing at the edge of the woods, just beyond the tree line, a silhouette, impossibly tall and dark, just like the one I had seen the night before. But this time it was moving. It was swaying, almost like it was dancing, but its limbs jerked in unnatural angles, as if it wasn't quite human. I froze, rooted to the spot. My body was screaming at me to turn and run, but I couldn't. My legs wouldn't move. My eyes were locked on the figure, watching it sway and bend, its shape stretching in ways that no human body should. And that's when it happened. Its head turned sharply, its gaze locking with mine, and I could feel the weight of its stare deep in my chest. It was waiting for me to move. And I knew, without a doubt, that it would not be letting me go. Not yet. Started to back away, my feet stumbling over the uneven forest floor. My heart pounded in my chest, but no matter how fast I moved, I couldn't escape the feeling that I was being drawn toward it, towards something. I didn't know what it wanted, but I knew this. I wasn't supposed to be here. Not anymore. My breath came in ragged gasps as I stumbled backward through the underbrush, the ground beneath me uneven, a maze of roots and rocks that seemed to appear out of nowhere. The figure at the edge of the woods, Mr. Shade, I thought, kept swaying, its silhouette now distorted by the trees as though it were stretching and contorting to match the shape of the forest itself. The movement was unnervingly slow, deliberate, like it knew I was watching, like it was savoring every second of my fear. I couldn't tear my eyes away. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to run, to turn and just get the hell out of there. But my legs felt like they were made of stone, and every step I took backward felt like a century in slow motion. It was the worst kind of paralysis, the kind that clamped down on your lungs, making each breath shallow and desperate. Don't turn around, I told myself. Just keep moving backward. Don't look away. But the problem was, the deeper I backed into the woods, the less familiar everything became. The trees I'd passed on my hike just a few minutes ago had changed, shifting in shape and size like they were no longer the same trees. The air grew heavier, more suffocating, as if the forest itself was absorbing all of the light, all of the sound, and pushing it into an endless vacuum. And then, just as I was about to turn and break into a run, the woods fell silent. Completely silent. It wasn't a gradual thing. It wasn't like the usual forest quiet you hear when an animal passes by or the wind dies down. No. This silence was sudden, absolute. I could no longer hear the distant rustling of leaves, the birds that had been calling earlier, the small creatures skittering in the underbrush. It was as if the forest had gone completely still, holding its breath with me. I froze, my body locked in place, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. Something about the silence felt unnatural, not peaceful, like it should have been, but hollow, empty, as if the world had disappeared, leaving nothing behind but a void. And then I heard it, a faint rustling sound just behind me, like something moving through the brush, but too light to be an animal. I whipped around, my heart pounding in my ears. There was nothing there, but the sound kept coming. Closer this time, the whispering noise like someone walking, but without a body. I spun back around toward the trees where the figure had been, but now it was gone. The silhouette was no longer standing at the tree line, watching me. The space where it had been was empty, save for the growing shadows of the forest stretching across the ground. The panic surged through me again, but I forced myself to take a slow, steady breath. Focus. There was no figure. There was no Mr. Shade or whatever the hell it was. I had to get back to the campsite. That was the only way out of this. I started walking again, slower now, trying to gather my wits. But the deeper I went, the more disoriented I became. The trail that I thought I knew, so simple, so familiar, wasn't the same. The trees seemed to crowd closer together, their trunks now impossibly thick, their branches blocking out the light from the sky. The air was cold, biting now, and with each step, it felt like I was sinking deeper into the earth. That's when I saw it, a shape just to my left, something dark and moving among the trees. The same tall silhouette, just like the one I'd seen earlier, but this time it was much closer. Too close. My pulse skyrocketed. I turned on my heel and began walking faster, then faster. I was full on running now, my feet slipping in the damp earth as I broke into a full sprint, but the trees seemed to stretch on forever. There was no end, no opening, no way out. The woods closed in on me, the walls of pine and fir surrounding me on all sides. The path, which had seemed so clear earlier, now felt like it was winding, looping, twisting back on itself. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't. My throat was dry, my body stiff with fear. My legs were burning, but I couldn't stop, not with it still behind me. I could feel it. I could feel its presence closing in like the shadow of a predator stalking its prey. And then, just as I thought I couldn't run anymore, I saw something that gave me a brief flicker of hope. A clearing, a space between the trees. Was almost there, just a few more steps, but then the whispering returned, louder this time, rasping and sharp. Ryan, it wasn't just a voice anymore. It was a chorus. Hundreds of voices all whispering my name in unison, filling the air around me like an invisible storm. My skin crawled as the whispers surrounded me, suffocating me, until I felt as though the very sound itself would tear me apart. Ryan. I snapped my head to the side, and there, standing at the edge of the clearing, just out of the reach of the light, was the figure again. But this time, it wasn't alone. There were more of them, hundreds of them, their shadows, stretched long and tall against the ground, some perched on branches, others crouched low to the earth, all of them silent, but their presence overwhelming. My chest tightened with the crushing weight of panic. I couldn't think. I couldn't breathe. My body was frozen again, locked in place by some unseen force. Then, I heard the one thing I knew I wasn't supposed to hear, the voice low and chilling but unmistakably close. "It's too late for you now, Ryan." And with that I understood. There was no escape. There hadn't been for years. I had become part of the forest, part of the shadow, a name added to the many others lost to this place. A new memory, a new whisper for Mr. Shade. And when the wind finally picked up again, when the leaves began to stir and the whispers started to fade into the distance, I knew one thing for certain. The woods had claimed me. It would be a long time before anyone else came looking for me. Long enough that the trees would forget my name and move on to the next. When I woke, it was not in my tent, nor by the campfire where I had last seen the outline of that monstrous figure standing in the shadows. I wasn't in the clearing, nor anywhere that made sense at all. I was lying flat on the cold, wet ground, surrounded by the towering trunks of trees that loomed like silent sentinels. The air around me felt thick, unnaturally still, as though the whole world had been suspended in time. There was no breeze, no sound of wildlife, nothing except the odd creak of the trees in the silence. I sat up slowly, confused, my body aching from the exertion of the night before, as though I had run a marathon through the dense woods. My head pounded from the suddenness of waking, the lingering memory of the whispers. Ryan, Ryan, still echoing in my skull. I rubbed my eyes and looked around, hoping to find some trace of my camp, of the trail, of a way out. But the forest before me was not the same. The trees were different, ancient-looking, their bark dark and slick with moisture. The ground beneath me was thick with moss and the remnants of old leaves, the faint scent of decay hanging in the air. The clearing I had hoped to find was nowhere in sight. Everything was wrong. I stumbled to my feet, my legs unsteady, my heart thumping wildly in my chest. The cold of the air bit at my skin, but my sense of fear burned hotter than any physical chill. I had to move. I had to leave. I pushed through the trees, each step more labored than the last. The forest stretched on, its dark canopy twisting overhead, hiding the moon. I had no idea which direction I was going. There was no trail, no sign of the familiar world I knew. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what had happened, of how I had ended up here. But the more I tried to remember, the more it felt like the details were slipping away from me, like they were being erased by the forest itself. And then I saw it. A figure standing at the edge of the trees, just out of reach of the light from my dying flashlight. It was tall, impossibly tall, its form a silhouette against the dim light of the sky. A man, or at least something that resembled a man. No face, just a black void where one should have been. A slick, oily darkness that drank in every bit of light, like it didn't belong in this world at all. It was Mr. Shade, and he was waiting. My body froze, my breath caught in my throat. I could feel my legs tremble beneath me, the urge to run pushing at my chest, but I couldn't move. There was no escaping him now. I knew that. I had crossed the line. I had entered his world, and there was no leaving it. "Mr. Shade," I whispered, the name of the thing that had haunted these woods for decades, the thing that had taken the people of Fells Hollow. But as the words left my mouth, I realized I was not speaking to it. No, I was speaking to something else, something older, something that had been watching me, waiting for me to finally understand. The figure shifted slightly, its head turning toward me in a slow, unnerving motion. It didn't move forward, but somehow I felt the weight of its presence press in on me. A cold, suffocating feeling, as though the air itself was being sucked out of my lungs. It spoke then, its voice deep, hollow like the sound of wind through an empty cavern. "You've seen it now, Ryan," it said. "You've crossed the threshold, there's no way back." I wanted to scream. I wanted to beg for mercy. But the words caught in my throat, thick and useless. "There's no way back," it repeated, its voice like the crack of dry branches, breaking. "You are one of us now. Just another name on the list." A deep, dark laugh echoed through the trees, a sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. It was a sound I could never forget. I didn't need to see its face to know what it was. I didn't need to hear its words to understand what was happening. The thing before me was the culmination of every story, every ghost story, every whispered warning that had haunted these woods for decades. It was the Watcher, the collector of names, the one who waited. I wanted to close my eyes, to pretend this was a nightmare, to wake up back in my tent, back in my world. But it didn't work that way, not here, not in this place. The ground beneath me began to shift as though it was moving, buckling under my feet. I felt a pull, stronger than gravity itself, dragging me down. The earth seemed to open up like a trap door beneath me, and I was falling, tumbling into a void of darkness. As I fell, the last thing I saw was the shadow of the figure at the edge of the trees, its blackened form standing tall and unmoving. And then, there was nothing. The next day, park rangers found my abandoned campsite. My tent was still there, the flap zipped shut from the inside, but there was no sign of me. No sign of anyone. A few hikers passing through the area reported hearing strange sounds in the distance. The sound of a man calling for help, his voice distorted and hollow, like an echo from the past. But when they investigated, they found nothing, except for a small, crumpled note tucked inside a hollowed-out tree scrawled in jagged handwriting. "Stay for breakfast, Ryan." I remember the first time I heard the knocking. It wasn't loud or jarring, but distinct enough to send a shiver down my spine. 3 soft raps on the closet door at exactly 3:17 a.m. The sound echoed through the house, cutting through the dead silence of the night. At first I thought it was just a dream, something I'd imagined in the dark, maybe the wind knocking something over outside. But no, this wasn't a dream. It happened again the next night, and the next. The house was old, and the air smelled musty, like dust and aged wood. We had just moved into the farmhouse on Blackwell Lane, a place I had never even seen before. My parents had decided it was time for a change, and I had been reluctant to leave the city life behind for the unknowns of Hollow's End, a small, sleepy town where everyone knew everyone else's business. But after Mom and Dad got into a heated argument about finances, it felt like the right thing to do. A fresh start. I didn't know it then, but that decision was going to change everything. The first night I heard the knocking, I tried to convince myself it was just the house settling. Old houses did that, right? They creaked and groaned. I was just imagining it. But then I heard it again. 3 knocks. Soft but deliberate. Like a child knocking to be let in. I got up, my heart pounding in my chest, and opened the closet door. There, lying on the floor in front of me, was a porcelain doll. I'd never seen it before. It was dressed in a red dress, now faded and tattered from age. The doll was old, like something my grandmother might have kept in a glass display case, never to be touched. But there it was, at the foot of the closet, staring up at me with glassy, dead eyes. I stepped back, not sure what to make of it. How it had gotten there. I hadn't put it there, and my parents hadn't brought anything like it with us. But there it was, and it felt wrong. As I bent down to pick it up, I smelled it. Wet earth and copper. The unmistakable scent of blood, mixed with something else. The air around me grew heavy, cold, like the weight of the past was pressing down on me. I dropped the doll and took a step back, my hand shaking as I fumbled for the light switch. The closet door creaked shut behind me. When I turned back, I saw the footprints, small muddy footprints leading away from the closet and toward the wall. My breath caught in my throat, and for a moment I couldn't move. The footprints weren't mine. They were too small, too childlike. I glanced at the door and saw something else, faint, almost imperceptible, like a shadow that shouldn't have been there. A face. Half hidden by tangled blonde hair, it peered out from the reflection in the glass. The face disappeared just as quickly as it had appeared, leaving behind only the sickly feeling of something watching me. Lily, I whispered. A name that came from nowhere, but somehow felt familiar. I had no idea where the name came from, but it was right. It felt like the only thing I could say. I spent the rest of the night awake, staring at the closet, my mind racing. I wanted to tell my parents, but I knew they wouldn't believe me. How could they? It sounded crazy, even to me. They had enough on their plates with the stress of the move, and I wasn't about to add to their worries by telling them I'd seen something in the closet. The next morning, I convinced myself it was nothing. Just a dream, or maybe I was just unsettled by the move. I'd get used to it, I told myself. But then it happened again, the night after, just like clockwork. 3 soft knocks. And that's when I realized I wasn't alone in this house. The next few days passed in a blur. I tried to go about my routine like everything was fine, but every time I looked at the closet, I felt that same cold sensation wash over me. The house, it seemed, was full of secrets. I could feel it in the walls, in the way the floorboards creaked beneath my feet, and the way the windows seemed to stare back at me, blank and empty. I wasn't the only one who'd noticed things. My parents had started to mention strange noises at night, scratching sounds from the walls as if something was trying to get out. But they chalked it up to the house settling too. One night, I woke up to the sound of giggling. It wasn't loud, but it was unmistakable. Soft, childlike laughter coming from somewhere deep in the house. I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. I sat up in bed and listened, straining to hear more. The giggling continued, faint and eerie. I glanced at the closet door. It was open, and then I heard the knocks again. 3. Soft taps, like fingers on wood. I didn't move. I couldn't. My mind screamed at me to run, to leave, to get out of that room and never come back. But my body stayed frozen, as if some unseen force was holding me in place. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the knocking stopped. I slowly turned my head toward the closet, and there she was, Lily. Her face was half hidden by tangled blonde hair, just as I had seen before, but this time she was smiling, a thin, crooked smile that didn't reach her eyes. She was standing in the reflection of the closet door, watching me, and then she whispered, just loud enough for me to hear, "Come play." The words sent a chill down my spine, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of dread wash over me. I had no idea who or what she was, but one thing was clear: she wasn't going anywhere, and neither was I. The knocking would continue night after night, and every night the same pattern: 3 knocks, a doll, muddy footprints, and Lily's face in the mirror, always a little closer. It wasn't until later that I realized the truth about Lily, the truth about what had happened to Emily Duval, the girl who disappeared so many years ago. Lily was Emily, and she was waiting for me to play. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed after that night, as if the house itself had shifted, its walls leaning in just a little closer. The air in the room felt heavier, thicker somehow. It wasn't just the dampness of the old house, it was something deeper, something unnatural. The next few days passed in a blur of nervous tension. Every little creak, every whisper of wind against the windows made my heart jump. I found myself staring at the closet door more often than I'd like to admit, almost expecting it to open on its own again, like it had that night. But it didn't. At least, not at first. By the third night, the knocking had become a pattern I couldn't ignore. Every night at 3:17 a.m., there it was, 3 soft taps against the closet door, a rhythmic sound that seemed too deliberate to be random. The first time I thought it was a fluke, maybe the house settling again or a branch tapping against the window in the wind. But the second night and the third, there was no denying it. The knocking wasn't a natural sound. It was a voice, a signal, and it was calling to me. The porcelain doll was still there in the same spot by the closet, its rotting red dress faded and its glassy eyes staring at me. I couldn't stop thinking about the way it had appeared the first time, like it was placed there intentionally. But by who? And why? One night after I heard the knocks, I decided to take action. I stood up from my bed, my body tense with fear, and walked over to the closet door. My hand trembled as I reached for the doorknob. I didn't want to open it. I didn't want to see what might be waiting for me on the other side. But something inside me, something dark and curious, urged me forward. I hesitated for just a second before twisting the knob. The door creaked open. At first I saw nothing. Just the usual mess of clothes I hadn't unpacked yet, hanging limp in the dim light. But as my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I saw something move. A shadow. A shape in the corner of the closet. I froze, every muscle in my body stiff with terror. It wasn't a person. It couldn't have been. There was no one there. But something had shifted. Then I saw it, the footprints. Muddy, small footprints leading from the back of the closet toward the door. They were unmistakable, child-sized, their edges blurred like they had been hurriedly wiped away. But they were still there. And they led right to the space in front of me. I wanted to run. I wanted to scream for my parents, but I couldn't. I was paralyzed, my feet glued to the floor. The air in the room turned cold, and I could see my breath forming little clouds in the dim light. The temperature dropped so suddenly that it felt like winter had descended on the room. The feeling of something close, something watching me, was almost unbearable. Then, as if it were a natural thing, the knocking began again. 3 soft raps against the wood of the closet door. This time I couldn't ignore it. It wasn't just a sound, it was a message. I closed the door quickly, the coldness biting at my fingers, and backed away, my mind racing. It didn't make sense. The doll, the footprints, the knocking, it was all too much to process. But it didn't stop there. The next night I found the doll in a different place. It had been moved again, but this time it was positioned in front of the closet mirror, facing me. Its cracked eyes seemed to follow my every movement. I could feel the weight of its stare as I walked past it, my skin crawling. And then, for the first time, I heard a voice. Soft, barely a whisper, but it was unmistakable. Cassidy. I froze. My name. It had come from the closet. But there was no one there. Cassidy, come play, the voice whispered again, the tone lilting like a child calling out to a playmate. I didn't know what to do. My mind raced, searching for a way to explain it, some logical reason for what I was hearing. But there was no explanation. There couldn't be. The knocking, the footsteps, the whispering, it was all tied to this place, and to Lily. I couldn't stop thinking about the name. Lily. Who was she? Was she the one trapped in the walls? Was she the one knocking, calling for me? As the days wore on, the knocking became more frequent. Each night I would hear it at exactly 3:17 a.m. But now, I couldn't simply ignore it. It was like a compulsion, a force that was slowly pulling me in, making me respond. I couldn't help but feel like Lily was beckoning me, urging me to come closer. I didn't know what she wanted, or why. She was doing this. But one thing was becoming clearer. She was waiting for me, and I couldn't stop her. The next day, my parents began to notice the changes too. Mom, who was usually so level-headed, started to talk about hearing things, whispers in the house, voices coming from the walls. She thought she was just imagining it, but the look in her eyes told me she was as scared as I was. Dad, on the other hand, chalked it up to stress from the move. He insisted that it was all just a coincidence, a figment of our tired minds adjusting to the new house. But deep down, I knew better. The next time I heard the knocking, I was ready. My mind was set. I had to face whatever was waiting for me in that closet. Whatever had taken Emily Duval, whatever had driven her to hide in the walls, was now trying to pull me in too. I couldn't let that happen. I stood up, heart hammering, in my chest and walked toward the closet door. The knocking started again, 3 taps. It was louder this time, more insistent, but when I opened the door there was nothing, only the darkness and the whispering. The voice, now almost pleading. Cassidy, come play. Forever. This time I didn't run, I stepped forward. The world, outside my bedroom, seemed miles away, though the house felt like it had shrunk around me. I stood frozen in front of the closet, hands shaking as I reached for the door. My breath came in short, quick bursts, and the air felt thick, almost suffocating, like something was pressing down on me. I could hear it, the whispering, soft and persistent, coming from somewhere behind the closet walls. The more I listened, the clearer it became. Come play with me, Cassidy. The words echoed in my mind like a song I couldn't forget. The whisper wasn't coming from the doll. It wasn't coming from the dark corners of the room, it was coming from the walls themselves. My gaze flicked to the hallway outside my door. I knew that Mom and Dad were downstairs, completely oblivious to the growing terror that had started to unravel me. I wished I could be like them, unaffected, unafraid. But something in me had changed since we moved into this house. I couldn't explain it, but I felt like I was becoming part of it, part of the house, part of whatever was trapped inside. The knocking came again, though this time it wasn't at the closet door. It came from deeper within the walls. 3 sharp raps, quick and deliberate, like someone was knocking from the other side. I instinctively looked over at the spot where I had heard the sound earlier, where the footsteps had crossed the room. But there was nothing there, just darkness. Cassidy. I swallowed hard and took a step back. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it all. I had to confront it. I had to understand why it was happening. I don't know what possessed me to do it, but I pulled the dresser away from the wall. The scraping sound of wood against hardwood seemed deafening in the stillness. Sweat beaded on my forehead as I leaned in close, my fingers brushing the peeling wallpaper. I could feel the vibrations in the walls, the low hum of something, someone, waiting, just beneath the surface. The knocking grew louder, closer. It was almost as if the walls themselves were alive. I pressed my ear to the cold plaster and closed my eyes. The sound was unmistakable now, scratching. It wasn't just knocking anymore, something was trying to break through, digging its way toward me. And then I heard a voice. It wasn't Lily. It wasn't the same childlike voice I had been hearing all along. This was different, low, gravelly, like the sound of a man clearing his throat after years of silence. "Help me," it rasped. I jerked back, my heart pounding in my chest. I stumbled over my own feet as I fell backward, hitting the floor hard, but I couldn't look away. Something inside me told me to keep looking. There was something in those walls, something buried, something waiting for me to find it. I grabbed the edge of the wallpaper and tore at it with both hands, ripping it from the wall in frantic movements. Beneath it, the plaster was cracked and broken, like the house itself was rotting from the inside out. I could feel something cold seeping through the cracks. My fingers trembled as I pried away more of the wall, digging deeper. Then I found it. The small handprint, pressed against the surface like a child's desperate attempt to escape. But this wasn't a child's handprint. No, this was something much worse. It was older, larger. There was something familiar about the way it was, pressed into the plaster like it had been there a long time. I froze. The whispering grew louder now, a chorus of voices all chanting in unison, saying my name. I couldn't stop myself. I kept pulling at the wall, each layer of plaster peeling away as though the house itself was trying to stop me. It felt like a race against time. I wasn't sure what I was looking for, but I knew I had to keep going. I had to find whatever was buried behind it. Finally, with one last tear of my hands, I exposed a small, narrow cavity, a hidden compartment tucked away within the walls of the closet. Inside there was something wrapped in a damp, yellowing cloth. It looked ancient, covered in a layer of dust and grime, but there was no mistaking what it was. A small, twisted figure. I gasped. It was a doll like the porcelain one I had found in my room, but this one was different. This one was covered in layers of dried blood. Its eyes were wide, cracked, its mouth frozen in a permanent grimace. As my fingers brushed against the doll's fragile form, I felt the temperature drop again. The air turned frigid. I pulled my hand back, horrified. The knocking started again, but this time it was different. It wasn't coming from the walls. It was coming from within the room itself. The closet door rattled violently, as if something was trying to force its way out. I backed away, my pulse racing. I couldn't explain it, but I knew the thing in the walls, whatever it was awake now. And it was angry. Cassidy. The voice rasped again, this time louder, more urgent. I could hear the desperation. In it, the plea for freedom. Let me out. And then, the door creaked open. At first I thought it was the wind, but I knew better. Something was standing in the doorway. Lily. Her form was faint, like a shadow against the dim light of the room, but I could see her clearly enough. The tangled blonde hair, the pale face half hidden behind it. She didn't move. She didn't speak, but her eyes, those eyes, locked onto mine with an intensity I couldn't escape. I tried to scream, but my throat was dry. My whole body felt frozen, like I couldn't move, couldn't look away. Lily's hand reached out, slowly, her fingers twitching like she was testing the air. And then I heard something else, a low guttural sound like scraping against metal. I turned, and that's when I saw it. A shadow in the closet. Something larger, something twisted, creeping forward, its form barely visible. Its face was a mass of writhing shapes, shifting in and out of focus like it didn't belong to any world that I knew. But its eyes, dark, hollow, endless, locked onto mine. I realized too late that it wasn't Lily who had been calling me. It was the thing in the walls, and it was coming for me. The room spun around me. My breath hitched as I stumbled backward, my legs threatening to give way beneath me. The air felt too thick, too dense, like the house itself was pressing down on me, closing in, pushing me toward the thing in the closet. Lily's figure, though still faint, seemed to flicker with each breath I took, as if she were losing her shape, becoming something less human. I blinked rapidly, trying to steady myself. My pulse raced so fast it felt like it was drowning out the world around me. The scratching sound grew louder, more frantic, like nails dragging across the surface of a coffin, desperate to break free. The closet door creaked again, but this time it wasn't just the sound of wood straining under pressure. It was as if something was inside, pushing against the door, trying to force it open. The handle rattled, a single sharp twist in the air. My body went cold as the realization hit me. The thing in the wall wasn't just trying to escape, it had already begun. I wanted to scream, to cry out for help, but no sound left my mouth. The only thing I could hear was the low, guttural growl that emanated from the closet, a noise that seemed to vibrate in my bones. It felt so wrong, like it was something not meant to be heard by human ears. I took one step backward, then another, but my legs were weak, my body trembling uncontrollably. Couldn't look away from the door. It was as if something was pulling my gaze toward it, forcing me to witness what was about to happen. In that moment I was paralyzed, not by fear, but by an overwhelming compulsion to understand. Understand what this thing was, why it was here, and what it wanted from me. The scratching intensified, followed by a low, agonized moan. The shadows in the room grew darker, deeper, like they were stretching toward the closet, eager to feed on whatever was inside. I looked at Lily, her pale, cracked face now clearly visible. Her eyes were wide, hollowed out, filled with a strange, sad emptiness. "Cassidy." Her voice was a whisper, a soft and fragile plea, but something was wrong about it. It didn't sound like a child's voice anymore. It was hoarse, as if her throat had been scratched raw. She reached toward me, her fingers twitching in the air as if begging for something or someone to notice her. Her form flickered again, and for a brief, heart-stopping moment, I saw something else. A shadow. A figure crouched behind her, just out of reach. It wasn't Lily, it was something much larger, something that filled the closet with its presence, casting an enormous, dreadful shadow across the room. It moved. I gasped and stumbled back into the corner, my back hitting the wall hard. My fingers clutched the edges of my nightgown, the fabric, tight in my grasp, as if it could anchor me to the reality I so desperately needed to hold on to. The thing in the closet was no longer hiding in the shadows. It was real, it was there, and it was coming toward me. "Lily," I whispered, unsure whether I was calling out for her or for the thing that was now attached to her. I knew deep down that she wasn't the one who had been knocking. She wasn't, the one who had led me here. The thing inside the closet had been using her. And as it finally stepped into the dim light, I saw it clearly. It wasn't a figure made of flesh. No, it was something much worse. It was a mass, a shifting, writhing collection of shapes, a grotesque combination of things that shouldn't have been together. Parts of it were solid, parts of it were liquid, and all of it was covered in a texture I could only describe as wrong. It was like the walls themselves had been sucked into it, twisted and distorted into a grotesque mockery of life. Its face was the most disturbing part, if you could even call it a face. It was a blank canvas, smooth and featureless, but covered in deep gashes that opened and closed like old wounds. From behind it, a pair of eyes, hollow and dark, shined with an unnatural light. They were focused on me. A low growl rumbled from its throat, vibrating through the air like the sound of metal scraping against stone. The air thickened with the smell of rot and decay, and I could taste the sharp tang of bile in the back of my throat. I closed my eyes for a brief second, trying to steady myself, but when I opened them again, I saw it. The thing in the wall was moving, creeping toward me like it was part of the house itself. It didn't walk. It slithered. Its limbs were unnatural, long and twisted like they weren't meant to bend in the way they did. I should have run. I should have screamed. But I couldn't. The thing reached out with one long, bony finger, and for a moment, I was frozen in place, as if it had me in its grip, trapping me in time. The finger touched my cheek, cold and clammy, sending a shock of ice through my body, and then it spoke, not in words, but in a voice that echoed inside my mind, deep and ancient. "You're the one who let me out." I gasped, my breath catching in my throat as the walls seemed to pulse around me, closing in from all sides. I could feel the house shifting, groaning under the pressure of something older than it, something that had been waiting for this moment. I was no longer just trapped in the house. I was part of it now, connected to whatever force had been buried here for years, something that had been lying dormant in the dark spaces of the house. And now, it was awake. I stumbled backward, my legs buckling as I collapsed to the floor. The thing loomed over me, its eyes burning into mine with an intensity I couldn't escape. I could feel its presence, overwhelming and suffocating, like it was trying to crawl into my skin. I knew, deep down, that there was no escape from it, now. The knocking came again. 3 slow, deliberate knocks, this time from behind the closet door. The house seemed to breathe, shifting with a life of its own, and I realized with a cold clarity that it wasn't just the walls that were alive. It was everything. "Cassidy, time to play." And that was the last thing I heard before everything went dark. The air felt heavier now, as though the house itself had become a living, breathing entity. Every shadow seemed to move in response to me, as if it were aware of my presence. The walls groaned, the wood beneath me creaked with unnatural sounds, and every breath I took felt like I was inhaling something ancient and suffocating. My heart pounded in my chest. My hands shook uncontrollably as I struggled to make sense of the nightmare unfolding before me. I knew it wasn't just the thing in the closet anymore. It was something much bigger, something older. It had been waiting for me, waiting for this moment to unfold. I crawled backward, away from the thing that loomed over me. I felt as though I was being sucked into something dark, something that wanted to consume me whole. My legs trembled beneath me, and I could taste the bitter tang of fear in my mouth. Thick like metal, the thing inside the closet wasn't even fully visible anymore. It was more a presence than a shape, a creeping darkness that blurred the lines between reality and nightmare. It pulsed and shimmered, a mass of contradictions, neither fully solid nor completely ethereal. It shifted constantly, adapting to the space, to the house, to the very air I breathed. I tried to speak, to call out for help, but the words stuck in my throat. My mouth felt dry, heavy, as though something was pressing down on my chest, suffocating me. My body was locked in place, paralyzed by the sheer weight of whatever force had taken over this house, this room. Then, there was a sudden noise, a sharp, jagged sound that cut through the oppressive silence, a loud, wet thud, like something heavy had fallen to the floor. I snapped my head around, my eyes darting toward the source. The porcelain doll that had first appeared in my closet lay on the floor. Its cracked face was turned toward me, its glass eyes lifeless and cold. A single drop of blood dripped from its mouth, hitting the floor with a sickening splat. I scrambled to my feet, pushing myself back against the wall as my brain tried to make sense of what was happening. How could this be real? How could a place, this place, hold so much darkness? Why was I trapped here, unable to escape? I glanced back at the closet. The door was ajar, the shadows inside shifting. Then, in the corner of my eye, I saw something move. A figure stepped forward from the shadows. No longer Lily, but something else, something much darker. It was large, too large to fit inside the closet. Its form was indistinct, a silhouette of something humanoid but wrong. Its limbs too long, too crooked. Its face, if you could even call it that, was a patchwork of shifting darkness. There were no eyes, only an empty void where its face should have been. And then it spoke, not with words but with a feeling, a pulse that resonated deep within my chest. It wasn't a voice I could hear. It was a thought I could feel. I am the one who waits, the one who never leaves, the one who takes and takes. It was the same thing I had felt since the moment I first heard the knocking. It wasn't just a haunting. It was a part of this place, a part of me now too. It had always been here, in the walls, in the floors, in the shadows, and it was never going to let me go. My breath caught in my throat, and for a moment I thought I might suffocate right there, crushed under the weight of everything that had happened. But then I heard it again, the soft, familiar sound. 3 knocks. Knock, knock, knock. They came from the closet door, but it wasn't the same as before. This time the knocks were different, quicker, more urgent. It was as if the thing inside the closet was impatient, as if it had been waiting for me to do something, waiting for me to make the next move. I closed my eyes, not knowing what to do. I wanted to scream, to run, to break free from this nightmare. But I couldn't move. I was stuck, held captive by whatever power controlled this house. And then I heard it, a whisper, just at the edge of my hearing. It was so soft, so faint that I almost missed it. Cassidy, come play forever. The whisper didn't come from the thing in the closet. It came from behind me, from the walls themselves. I turned slowly, my neck stiff and aching from the tension. The walls, once solid and real, seemed to have become something else. They were moving, pulsing with life, and I could see faint outlines of hands and faces, barely visible under the layers of plaster. They pressed against the walls, trying to break through, trying to reach me. The floor beneath me trembled as if something heavy was shifting below. The house groaned in response, its old bones creaking under pressure. I heard another noise, faint at first, like the sound of scratching. But it wasn't from inside the walls this time. It was coming from the floor, the very foundation of the house. I couldn't breathe. The walls closed in, and the thing from the closet moved closer, stretching its limbs toward me, its form shifting like smoke. It seemed to be growing, becoming bigger, its presence taking up more space in the room. Cassidy. The whisper again. It was louder now, more urgent. Cassidy, come home. And in that moment, I knew. The house wasn't just haunted, it was alive. And it had claimed me just like it had claimed Emily before me. It wasn't a ghost, it was something worse, a force that fed on the living, feeding off their fear, their pain, their very essence. I felt it then, the crushing weight of it all. The house was no longer just a house, it was a trap, a living, breathing entity that consumed everything it touched, pulling everyone who stayed inside into its endless, unyielding darkness. And I understood with terrible clarity. The knocking wasn't just a game, it was a summons, a call to those who were marked by the house, to those who had come too close, to those who had heard its whispers. The knocks continued, but now they were calling me. Knock, knock, knock. It was time to answer. I wasn't supposed to end up in Ravenshade. After the divorce, I'd sworn I'd never go back to Oregon. Too many memories. Too many reminders of things I'd lost. But I was worn out from the city, from the endless noise and the endless people. And when I saw the ad for Blackthorn Cottage, I didn't think twice. It wasn't that I believed in the rumors about the widower Thomas Whitmore, his seances, the way his wife Eleanor's name was still whispered on the streets of Ravenshade. No, I didn't believe any of it, but I needed peace. And the cottage, with its ivy-choked stones and overgrown garden, seemed like the perfect place to find it. I signed the paperwork quickly, not bothering to dig into the history of the property. Who had time for that? Besides, the price was too good to pass up. It sat at the edge of Whisper Hollow Cemetery, a place where the town buried its dead, just across from the crumbling stone walls of the old graveyard. The cottage was old, built in 1889 if the realtor was to be believed. But it had character. I could see it. The kind of character that was right for a writer like me, someone who needed inspiration more than peace. The first night was uneventful. The house groaned under the weight of its age, but that was to be expected. I hadn't yet unpacked. Just a few boxes scattered about, my desk set up in the study. The place was still heavy with dust, the air thick with the scent of long-forgotten wood and something else, something faintly floral and strange. It clung to the walls, like it had been waiting for me. I chalked it up to my imagination. The next day, I started writing. I wasn't exactly sure what I was writing yet, but I had the setting, the cottage, the graveyard, the town, and that was enough for now. I needed to clear my head after the divorce. I didn't care what the words were. I just needed to write. The second evening, things had started to get odd. I'd been working late into the night, a cup of tea cooling beside me as I tapped away at my keyboard. I'd just finished a paragraph or so, I thought, when I felt it, a cold hand press against the small of my back. I jolted upright, almost tumbling off the chair, my heart racing. The room was still, save for the faint hum of the overhead light. But the air, it was different. It was cold, and the smell of lilacs was overwhelming, sharp and sweet, like the flowers had burst into bloom right beneath my nose. I turned around. The cellar door, which I'd thought was locked, stood slightly ajar, a sliver of darkness beyond. I didn't want to go down there, but the sensation of being watched was too strong. My feet moved before my mind could catch up, my hand gripping the old brass doorknob as I stepped into the cold air of the cellar. Nothing, just shadows. But the cold lingered, pressing down on me. It wasn't just the chill of the night, it felt wrong. Like something that had been there before me, waiting, and I'd disturbed it. I left the cellar door open that night, and when I returned to my desk, my manuscript pages were no longer scattered as I'd left them. They had been rearranged, pieced together into neat chapters, and the handwriting, it wasn't mine. It was bold, flowing, with an elegance that was nothing like my frantic scribbles. I froze. The words on the page were strange, familiar somehow, though I couldn't place them. Eleanor will stay with you. She will watch over you. I stared at the words, my pulse quickening. Eleanor? The name was there too. The woman Thomas Whitmore had written about in his journal, the one who had agreed to stay, and then the horrific seance that had ended with 5 people dead in 1921. I had laughed at the stories, at the idea of a ghost watching over people. But this was different. I could feel the weight of something ancient in the room, something that wasn't just a story. That night I left fresh lilacs in a cracked vase on the writing desk, the same as I had seen in the old journal. I didn't know why I did it. I wasn't superstitious, not at all. But there was something in the air that pulled me to act, like I was following some long-forgotten script, my own instincts guiding me toward a path I couldn't see. I didn't sleep much that night. And when I woke the next morning, the manuscript was still there, pages filled with words I didn't remember writing. They told stories of people in distress, of women lost and alone, of a name. Eleanor. I had made a mistake. I realized then that I wasn't in control anymore. Something in the cottage had woken up, and it was far older than anything I'd imagined. In the days that followed, the strange occurrences at Blackthorn Cottage didn't stop. In fact, they seemed to intensify. At first, I tried to convince myself that everything could be explained away. It wasn't that I believed in ghosts or hauntings, no, that would make me sound crazy. But when things began to happen that I couldn't explain, it became harder and harder to brush it all off as coincidence. It started with the gloves. They appeared one evening, perfectly placed on the hall table as if someone had carefully set them down. Black lace gloves, delicate and elegant, as though they belonged to another time. I'd never seen them before. I thought maybe they were left by a previous owner, but when I asked the realtor, she looked at me with confusion and said the house had been empty for years. The gloves seemed to be waiting for me. Every morning they were still there, sitting neatly on the table. I told myself that they must have been forgotten by someone, though I couldn't shake the feeling that they were somehow meant to be there. Each time I touched them, a cold shiver ran down my spine, and the lilac scent in the air would grow stronger, filling the room with its heady sweetness. I never moved the gloves. It felt like a rule, though I couldn't explain why. Every time I glanced at them, it was as if a silent voice was warning me not to disturb them. I would leave them in place, and the house would return to its eerie quiet. But every time I left the room and came back, they were exactly where I had left them. I tried to ignore it, but the gloves became a constant presence, a reminder of the unspoken rules that seemed to govern my life in the cottage. Then came the grandfather clock. It was an old thing, a heavy dark wood piece with intricate carvings and brass hands that gleamed under the dim light of the study. I had noticed it the first time I entered the room, but I hadn't paid much attention to it. But the clock wasn't just any old timepiece. It never kept the correct time. I'd set it to the right hour when I first moved in, but no matter what I did, it would always strike 3:17 a.m., the same time every night. It was like a cruel joke, the clock's bell tolling at a time when I knew I should be fast asleep. The first night I heard it, I had been up late working, trying to get a grip on the strange manuscript that seemed to be writing itself. At exactly 3:17 a.m., the clock chimed. The sound was louder than I had expected, echoing through the old stone walls of the cottage. My heart skipped a beat, but I chalked it up to an old, unreliable mechanism. After all, the clock was from a bygone era. Who knew how accurate it was? But the next night the chime came again, and the next. It was always 3:17 a.m. It didn't matter what time I went to bed or what I was doing. The chime was always the same. I couldn't get used to it, no matter how hard I tried. I would lie awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, waiting for that relentless, hollow sound to fill the silence. And then there was the candle, the blue seance candle. I had seen it in the study, tucked in a small wooden holder on the far end of the desk, beside the typewriter. It wasn't anything special, just an old wax candle, but every so often, when I wasn't looking, it would light itself. I would come into the room, and there it would be, flickering quietly in the dim light of the study. Sometimes the flame would dance, casting eerie shadows on the walls, as if something were watching me from the corners of the room. The first time it happened, I thought I had accidentally lit it myself and forgotten about it. But then it happened again, and again. It wasn't just that the candle would light itself, it was the way it would flicker as if it were communicating with me, like it was trying to tell me something. The night it happened for the third time, I knew I had to sit at the table. The flame was too insistent. As much as I didn't want to admit it, I knew this was part of something larger. It wasn't just the candle that had a life of its own. It was the house, the cottage, the legacy of Eleanor and Thomas Whitmore. I took a seat at the table, the candle flickering wildly in front of me, casting strange shadows on the walls. The pages of my manuscript had been rearranged again, as they always were, but now the words on the page were different. They were starting to tell me what to do. Sit, the words seemed to whisper. Listen, see. As I stared at the words, my hand trembling, I realized that I was no longer writing the story. The story was writing me. Suddenly there was a draft, a cold gust that swept through the room, extinguishing the candle. I looked up. My breath caught in my throat. A shadow moved in the doorway, its shape barely visible in the dark. The scent of lilacs intensified, thickening the air, and I heard a soft feminine voice. "Eleanor," it whispered, so faint that I wasn't sure if it was real. "Eleanor will stay." I turned around, but the room was empty. The words from my manuscript seemed to blur together, becoming an incoherent jumble of letters and symbols. I stood up and backed away, my head spinning. This was no longer my story. It was Eleanor's. That was the moment I realized I had crossed a line. The house, the spirits, the rules, they had a hold on me now, and there was no way out. The house was never just a place, it was a pact. And I was bound to it. It was October 31st, 2014, a cold, crisp night when the weight of everything that had been unfolding in the cottage pressed down on me. The house, once just an eerie relic from the past, had become something else, a force, a presence that seemed to breathe, that seemed to watch me. And tonight I could feel the air thick with expectation, as though the house itself was preparing for something, waiting for me to acknowledge it. The anniversary of Thomas Whitmore's disappearance was always a silent marker, one I never spoke about but had come to dread. In the months leading up to it, strange things had intensified. The reordering of my manuscript, the smell of embalming fluid wafting in without warning, the way the candles would flicker, sometimes without a breeze. But this night was different. It felt bigger, more final, like the pieces of the story were converging into something inevitable. I sat in my study, the clock on the wall ticking louder than usual. It was almost as if time was crawling forward, its tick-tock pulling me into something I wasn't sure I could escape from. I kept glancing at the typewriter where the blue candle had been sitting untouched for days, the flame always just a little too insistent. I'd become accustomed to its presence, but tonight I couldn't ignore the pull. The rules of the house were inescapable, and this particular night seemed to demand my attention. At 11:45 p.m. I heard it, the sound of faint writing, tapping against the keys of the typewriter. It was a soft, rhythmic clack, not the hurried pace of someone desperate, but measured, deliberate. The sound felt familiar in a way that made my stomach tighten with unease. I stood up slowly, my feet numb from sitting too long. My breath was coming faster now, and I could feel a cold sweat beating on the back of my neck. As I crossed the room, the air thickened, like something unseen was pushing against me, urging me to sit. My hands trembled as I reached the desk. The typewriter was silent now. The room felt heavier, and then from the corner of my eye, I saw the blue candle flare to life. It was as if the house itself had exhaled. The air grew colder, the shadows deeper. I could almost hear the walls groan with the weight of something that had been dormant for far too long. I could feel it in my chest, that unshakable pressure. Something was coming, and it was coming for me. I sat down, almost against my will, and stared at the typewriter. The keys began to tap on their own, slow and measured, as though the machine itself was drawing breath. "Let me show you what I saved you from." The words appeared one by one, written in a jagged, uneven scrawl. It wasn't my handwriting, though I knew it was mine in some strange, twisted way. I watched as the ink bled across the paper, forming those words with painful precision. Suddenly, the walls seemed to ripple as though the very structure of the cottage was alive, breathing. The floor beneath me hummed, vibrating with an unnatural energy. My heart pounded in my chest, the thudding sound drowning out everything else. I could feel my pulse in my fingertips as I hovered over the typewriter, unable to stop myself from reading. The shadows in the room deepened, stretching unnaturally long, and then the candlelight flickered, casting grotesque shapes on the walls. Distorted faces, twisted and featureless, creeping out from the corners of the room. They weren't human, at least not anymore. I had read enough local folklore to know what was happening. The stories of Eleanor, the pact, Thomas Whitmore's twisted desire to keep his loved ones close even after death. And now, I had become part of that equation. The bargain was sealed. The typewriter clacked again. "You are part of the story now," the machine whispered, the sound like 1,000 voices whispering in unison. "You will see." The walls pulsed. The air turned thick with the scent of lilacs and something heavier, more metallic. I could feel it in my bones, the cold, clammy grip of something ancient, something that had been waiting for this moment. My vision blurred, the edges of the room growing dim as if I were sinking into a fog that wouldn't release me. I saw flashes then, images of myself, broken and bloodied, sprawled on the side of a road, her car wrecked, my body unrecognizable, torn apart in a crash that hadn't happened yet. My breath caught in my throat, the images too real, too vivid to be anything but a warning. Another flash, my ex-husband, standing over me, his hands wrapped around a pillow, smothering me in my sleep. I gasped, shaking my head. It was just a vision, just a manifestation of the house, of Eleanor's influence over me. But something deep inside me knew. It wasn't just a vision, it was a prophecy. And then, a final image, the most horrifying of all. A faceless figure crouching behind every near miss, every brush with death that had come so close but never quite reached me. It had always been there, lurking, waiting for its moment. The words formed on the table, more clearly than before. "Payment comes due." I leaned back, gasping for air, my hands trembling. My mind raced. I wasn't just writing a story. I was writing my own fate. The candle burned brighter now, the shadows dancing wildly. It was as if Eleanor herself was watching over me, showing me the path I was doomed to walk, and the price I would have to pay. Suddenly the walls shook. The air grew icy. A sound like the soft creak of something shifting deep inside the house echoed through the room. I tried to run. I stumbled toward the door, my legs weak, but the room seemed to close in on me. The door wouldn't open. I turned around and the typewriter continued to type, as if in a fevered frenzy. The house was alive, and it was telling me the story of my death, my betrayal, my soul bound to Eleanor's forever, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't escape it. The house didn't just breathe, it watched. The events of that night left a deep, unshakable mark on me. I couldn't escape the visions, the horrifying images of death and betrayal that haunted my every waking moment. The truth was clear now, and it was impossible to ignore. I had become a part of something ancient, something dark, and now it had me. The bargain that Thomas Whitmore had struck with Eleanor was not just a story. It was a curse, a contract written in blood, and it had been passed down to me. I hadn't slept since the night of the seance. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Those twisted faces in the shadows, their eyes empty, their mouths open in silent screams. I heard the faint whispers of Eleanor in the corners of my mind, calling me back to the typewriter, urging me to write, to finish the story. And as much as I wanted to refuse to walk away from this madness, I knew I couldn't. I was bound to it just as Thomas had been. For days, I tried to avoid the cottage's oppressive grip. I left, drove around town, stayed with a friend, anything, to put distance between myself and the place that now held my soul. But no matter where I went, I could still smell the lilacs, faint but persistent, as if they followed me. The sensation of invisible fingers brushing against my skin remained constant, a reminder that the house was still calling, still waiting. And then, one morning, just after dawn, I returned to the cottage. The moment I crossed the threshold, I felt it, an overwhelming pressure on my chest, like the weight of the house itself was pressing down on me. The air was thick, heavy with something unspeakable. My breath caught in my throat, and I heard it. The sound of the typewriter keys, tapping softly in the study. It wasn't a question. It was an invitation. Eleanor was waiting for me. The house was quiet, too quiet. I stepped cautiously into the study, my heart pounding. The blue candle was still flickering on the desk, its flame dancing wildly, as though it were alive, and the typewriter sat there untouched since the night of the visions. I didn't want to approach it, but I couldn't resist. Something inside me knew I had to. I sat down, my fingers shaking as I touched the keys. The room felt colder now, a biting chill creeping into my bones. The walls seemed to grow darker and the shadows flickered unnaturally, as if they had a life of their own. The typewriter clicked to life on its own, just as it had before. I had no control over it, no power to stop the words that began to form on the page. "You have done well," the typewriter typed, the words slowly appearing in messy, uneven strokes. "You have written my story, but now it is time for you to write yours." I stared at the words, my breath catching in my throat. I could feel it then, the cold, creeping sensation that something was moving in the shadows just out of my line of sight. The walls seemed to pulse with a life of their own, and I could hear the faint whispers again, this time louder, more insistent. I wanted to stop, wanted to tear the paper from the typewriter and run out of the house, but I couldn't. I was trapped, a prisoner to this cursed place bound to Eleanor's will. And then, the typewriter wrote something that made my blood run cold. "Your next chapter awaits." I could feel the pull of the house deep inside me, a force stronger than anything I had ever known. I wanted to scream, to throw the typewriter across the room, but I couldn't move. My hands were glued to the keys, my fingers typing the words, even as they burned into my mind. The house was feeding on my fear, using my dread to write the next chapter of its twisted story. The shadows shifted again, growing darker, more defined. I could see shapes now, dark, formless figures standing just beyond my vision. They whispered in the darkness, their voices muffled, but I could feel them all around me. The walls seemed to close in, the air growing heavier with each passing second. And then the realization hit me like a wave. I wasn't just writing a story, I was living it. The events that had occurred since I arrived at Blackthorn Cottage were no longer just strange occurrences. They were part of a bigger narrative, one that had been written long before I arrived. The house wasn't just a place, it was a living thing, a being that fed off my fear, my thoughts, my life. I was part of the story now, a character in a tale spun by Eleanor's twisted hand. And no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't escape. The house would always be with me, it would never let me go. The typewriter clicked again. "Write, Sarah," it commanded. "Finish the story." My fingers moved against my will, typing the words that had been dictated to me, the words that would seal my fate. I could hear Eleanor's voice in my ear, her whisper soft but commanding. "Your words are mine now, Sarah," she said. "You are the author, but I am the story." I finished the sentence, my hands trembling, and the room grew silent. The shadows disappeared, the cold lifted, and for a moment, I thought I had escaped it. But I knew better. The door to the study creaked open, and I turned, expecting to see Eleanor's figure standing there waiting to claim me. But it was worse. Standing in the doorway was my reflection in the window, my face pale, my eyes wide with fear. And behind me, just barely visible in the glass, was a figure, a faceless shape with a black veil. Eleanor. She had always been there, watching, waiting. And now, the story had come full circle. Time had warped within the walls of Blackthorn Cottage. Days blurred into nights, and the passage of hours no longer held meaning. The moment I accepted that I was a part of the house's twisted history, the moment I sat before that infernal typewriter, it felt as if I had crossed an irreversible line. No longer was I a writer living in a charming, albeit eerie cottage, in the woods. I was a vessel, a conduit for something older, darker than I could ever fathom. And the more I wrote, the more I felt myself fading. The last few weeks were a haze of ink, paper, and dread. My work had become less about telling stories and more about letting them take shape. Eleanor's whispers guided my hand, her desires, twisting my every sentence, every plot, until my own thoughts became a distant echo. At night, when I lay in bed, I heard her voice, sometimes sweet, sometimes cold, always commanding. It wasn't just her stories that filled my head, but the memories of those who had come before me. Thomas Whitmore's obsessions, his words, carved into the wood of the seance table, the blood-soaked pages of his journal. He had been lured into this madness just as I had, but he had disappeared, vanished into whatever hellish dimension the house had become. And now it was my turn. On the evening of October 31st, 2015, the anniversary of Thomas's disappearance, the EI house grew heavy with anticipation. The air was thick with the scent of lilacs again, overpowering and nauseating, filling my lungs with the taste of rot. The grandfather clock in the hall struck 3:17 a.m. as it always did, sending a ripple of unease through my chest. I had long since stopped trying to stop it. That night the typewriter began its relentless clicking as it always did, but this time, the words that appeared on the page were different. They weren't my thoughts. They weren't Eleanor's. These words felt like they came from deep within the walls of the house, from something that wasn't just alive. It was waiting. "She is almost ready," the typewriter typed. My fingers trembled as they hovered above the keys. I couldn't stop myself from typing, couldn't stop the words from flowing. It was like being in a trance. The house wanted this, needed it, and if I didn't comply, I didn't want to think about the consequences. The candle on my desk flickered wildly. It was the blue candle, the one that always signified a seance was about to begin, but there was no table this time, no ritual to follow. The house itself had become the ritual. I could feel it, the pulling sensation like my skin was being tugged from the inside out. Something shifted in the shadows, a dark form moving in the corners of my vision. It was Eleanor. It was always Eleanor, but now she was closer, her presence suffocating, pressing against me like the walls themselves had come alive. The air crackled with the hum of something terrible about to happen. And then, the final word came through the typewriter. Payment. I had been waiting for this, the moment of reckoning. The deal was sealed, the story finished. Eleanor had her story. Now I would pay the price. I stood up, but the room spun around me. My head was heavy, my thoughts clouded, as though my very essence was being drained. I stumbled to the window, trying to get some air, but the room felt smaller with each step I took. I reached for the latch, my hand trembling, and that's when I saw it. A reflection in the glass, my own face, twisted and wrong. I had changed. No longer was I Sarah Bennett, the writer. I was something else, something hollow. The figure in the glass smiled, back at me not with my own lips, but with a gaping, stitched mouth, a mouth that wasn't mine but hers. "Eleanor," I whispered, my voice hollow and detached as if someone else was speaking for me. And then, before I could take another breath, I felt her fingers, cold and skeletal, pressing against my back, pushing me forward. The walls groaned. The house groaned. And all I could hear was the soft, relentless tapping of the typewriter, as if it were now dictating my every action. The door to the study slammed open, and I was pulled toward it, my feet dragging across the floor, unwilling but helpless to stop. My vision blurred, and as I stumbled into the hallway, I heard the house's whispers, thick and wet, like the sound of ancient, decaying things. The typewriter was still running, but it was no longer in the study. The room was empty. The silence was deafening. I was alone, except I wasn't. The door to the study creaked open once more, and I saw something, someone, standing in the threshold. My breath caught in my throat. It was Eleanor, her veil billowing like smoke, her face obscured beneath layers of shadow and sorrow. Her hands, those pale, delicate hands, extended toward me, fingers twitching as if beckoning me forward. The house groaned behind her. I knew what I had to do. The contract had been made long ago. The blank page on the typewriter had been left, for me, just as it had for every other occupant of Blackthorn Cottage. And as I reached toward the typewriter one last time, I felt it, the final thread snapping. My fingers fell onto the keys. The typewriter clicked once more, the last sound I would ever hear, and I typed one final sentence. The next chapter begins. The house was quiet, but I was gone. I never thought I'd end up in Crestwood Heights. Honestly, I didn't even know it existed until I found the house. You'd think a guy who worked in software engineering and spent most of his time behind a computer screen would know the ins and outs of every town he lived in. But that wasn't the case for me. When I moved here, I was looking for a place that was quiet, affordable, and, most importantly, close enough to Providence for work, but far enough away from the city to escape the constant noise. That's how I ended up in Crestwood Heights, a neat little neighborhood on the outskirts of the city, with streets that wound around like forgotten pathways and houses that seemed untouched by time. The homes were all new construction, all neatly painted in soft grays and pastels, lawns, perfectly trimmed. I remember the first time I drove down Willowbrook Drive, the street where I'd eventually end up renting a small bungalow. It was like something out of a postcard. Quiet, serene, a nice change from the hectic buzz of the city. But the place had a history, one that wasn't immediately obvious, but once I started looking into it, it was impossible to ignore. Crestwood Heights was built over the ruins of the old Pemberton Asylum. Now, Pemberton wasn't a topic anyone liked to discuss in casual conversation, but you'd hear whispers if you knew the right people. An old mental hospital that had closed. Down in 1974, the asylum had a dark past that was buried under layers of suburban development and white picket fences. Pemberton's final patient, Arthur Vickery, was the one everyone remembered. He wasn't a typical patient. He had once been a well-known investment banker, dressed in sharp gray suits and tailored jackets, his reputation tarnished by a series of disastrous financial decisions. According to the asylum's records, Vickery's life unraveled in a dramatic fashion. After being diagnosed with a mental breakdown, he was admitted to Pemberton in 1961. His last few years there were spent in relative isolation, and by the time he died, his behavior had become erratic. Before he hung himself in his padded cell, in 1963 he left behind a cryptic message, a final journal entry that read, "They've approved my transfer. I leave at 8:15. Some say that Vickery's death wasn't suicide at all. Some believe he made a deal with the people who ran Pemberton, a deal that could never be undone. It was the strange details of his story that intrigued me. The fact that he died on the morning of October 19th, 1963, at precisely 8:15 a.m., the same time the sightings would later begin. The oddity of his final words still echoed through the small stories passed from one neighbor to the next. His body was never fully examined, and it wasn't until years later that the rumors started to swirl. Locals who lived in the neighborhood, before the construction of Crestwood Heights, would tell you that they'd often heard strange noises at night. There were stories of a man in a gray suit, walking the empty streets at night carrying a briefcase that dripped something dark. The story seemed to take on a life of its own. Some folks said that if you stood at the intersection of Willowbrook Drive and Hemlock Avenue at exactly 7:42 a.m. or 5:18 p.m., you might catch a glimpse of him, a tall figure walking toward the old train station that had been closed for decades. I didn't think much of the rumors at first. People like to tell stories, embellish details, turn ordinary things into tales of the bizarre. But there was always something unsettling about the old stories surrounding Vickery, as if they were trying to warn me. I didn't know it then, but those warnings would be too late to matter. Because the moment I stepped into Crestwood Heights, I stepped into the web of a story I couldn't escape. I was still trying to ignore all the talk about ghosts and haunted streets when I first saw him. The man in the gray suit. It all started during the spring of 2018, just a few months after I had settled into my house on Willowbrook Drive. At first, I noticed nothing out of the ordinary. The mornings were crisp and the evenings still held a touch of chill from the winter. I was used to waking up early and going for a jog before work. It had become a routine, something that helped clear my head before diving into the tech-heavy demands of my job. That was when I first saw him. It was 7:42 a.m., just like clockwork. I remember looking down at my watch as I jogged past the intersection of Willowbrook and Hemlock Avenue, my feet pounding against the pavement, the early morning light just beginning to filter through the tall trees that lined the street. As I rounded the corner, I saw a figure standing at the edge of the intersection. At first, I thought it was just another person out for a morning walk, but there was something off about this figure. He was tall, taller than anyone I'd ever seen before, and the gray suit he wore was old-fashioned like something from the 1940s, complete with a faded tie and polished shoes that gleamed even in the early morning light. I could barely make out his face. It wasn't that he was too far away or too obscure in the mist of morning fog. No, it was that his face looked wrong. It was like it was obscured by shadows, as if the light itself recoiled from his features. The moment I glanced at him, I felt a chill run down my spine, one I couldn't explain. But the strangest thing, he wasn't moving. The figure just stood there, facing the old train station in the distance, his briefcase resting at his side. The cracked leather of the briefcase seemed to shimmer with a slick, wet sheen, as if something dark had been dripping from it. I wasn't sure if it was rainwater or something else, but I wasn't about to stick around long enough to find out. It was already uncomfortable. I had been out on this route countless times and had never seen him before. It wasn't just that he looked out of place. He didn't even seem to belong in this neighborhood. It was almost as if he didn't belong in time itself. I kept running, pushing the sight out of my mind, but something stayed with me. The hairs on the back of my neck were still standing up as I turned the corner and began the final stretch toward home. I glanced over my shoulder once, half expecting to see him following me. But there was nothing. No figure standing at the intersection. No dark shape lingering in the fog. I chalked it up to a fluke. Maybe it was a local eccentric or a businessman who just happened to be walking to the old train station. After all, it had been abandoned for decades, but who's to say people didn't still wander by it from time to time? But then I started noticing him more often. The next day, 7:42 a.m. again. Same time, same intersection, same man in the gray suit. At first, I thought it was just coincidence. Maybe he lived nearby. Maybe he was walking to the station every day, at the same time. But after the third or fourth sighting, it became harder to ignore. I started to time it. Every morning at exactly 7:42 a.m. I would run past the intersection, and there he was, waiting. Standing perfectly still, his face still obscured, his briefcase dripping dark liquid. It wasn't just me who saw him either. I began to notice that the neighborhood dogs, those that I had often seen walking with their owners, tails wagging happily, would suddenly go quiet when they passed that same intersection. They'd stop, ears perked up, and then start growling, whining, or tugging on their leashes to get away as fast as they could. I watched from my window one morning as a woman and her golden retriever tried to walk by, and the dog refused to move, its hackles raised. The woman had to tug the dog along, glancing nervously at the intersection, but she never stopped walking. Then, one morning, it got stranger. I was running a little later than usual, and it was 8:10 a.m. when I hit the intersection. For the first time, I didn't see the man. I kept running, still expecting him to appear at the same spot, but he didn't. Not then, not anywhere. But when I crossed the street to continue my run, I saw him, walking down the middle of Willowbrook Drive. No, not walking. Gliding. His movements were too smooth, too fluid, like he was floating just above the ground. His head remained slightly tilted downward, as if he was looking at something I couldn't see. And in his hands, his briefcase was still dripping dark, sticky fluid. It seemed to gleam more brightly now, like it was alive, moving. Froze, my breath catching in my throat. And then, just like that, he turned into an alley, a street that didn't exist on any map I'd seen before. I wasn't sure if it was a forgotten alley or just part of my imagination, but I couldn't follow him. He was gone before I could make a decision. The man was there one moment, and then he wasn't. But every time I tried to shake the thought, I couldn't. He was always there, always waiting at the intersection, 7:42 a.m., 5:18 p.m. every weekday, like clockwork. As the days passed, the unsettling presence of the man in the gray suit became something I couldn't ignore. I was obsessed, but it wasn't the kind of obsession that left me frantically searching for answers. Instead, it was a quiet, nagging awareness that this was something I had to understand, something that, in the back of my mind, I felt was already pulling me deeper into its strange, unknowable grasp. It started with the small things. At first, I had thought I was imagining it, the coincidence of his appearance at exactly 7:42 a.m. each day. But then, I began to realize that there was an undeniable rhythm to his presence. Like clockwork, he appeared standing motionless at the intersection, waiting. The problem was I couldn't figure out why he was there, or more importantly, what he was. I had tried to tell myself that it was just a strange man in a suit, someone who had a weird habit of walking at the same time every day. But as I paid more attention, something became clear. He wasn't like anyone I had ever seen before. I had started keeping track of the times, 7:42 a.m. every weekday, without fail. I didn't know what drew me to this specific time, but each morning, the moment I reached that intersection, I would look over to see him, and every time it was the same. The man never acknowledged me. His eyes, if he even had any, were hidden behind the shadow of his face, his lips barely visible, his features obscured by the folds of his aging suit. The briefcase never changed, always in his left hand, always dripping with that thick, dark fluid. It was after a week of this strange encounter that I began to notice the rules. They were subtle at first, easy to miss, but over time I realized they governed the way he appeared, the way he interacted with the world around him. The first rule: he only appears on weekdays. This was the easiest to verify. I went for runs on weekends, but there was no sign of him. No man in a gray suit waiting at the intersection. No dark liquid dripping from his briefcase. Only silence. It was as if he simply didn't exist on the weekends. I thought about that for a while. Why only weekdays? Was it tied to something specific about the time and place? Maybe it was linked to something I didn't understand, some unspoken pattern that kept him confined to those precise hours. The second rule: if you try to follow him, he disappears into streets that don't exist. This was the rule that made my stomach drop. One morning, driven by a mix of curiosity and growing unease, I decided to follow him. I wasn't sure what I hoped to find. Maybe I just wanted some kind of proof that I wasn't losing my mind, that the man in the gray suit wasn't just a figment of my imagination. I waited until 5:18 p.m., when I knew he'd be there again. As usual, he stood at the intersection, still as a statue. This time I decided to try something different. I wasn't going to run past him. Instead, I would approach him, see where he went, and get a closer look at the figure I had been watching for weeks. As I neared the intersection, I noticed a strange thing. The usual feeling of unease, the feeling of being watched, had intensified. The air was thick with it, like something was watching me, waiting for me to make the next move. I crossed to the other side of the street and followed him, keeping a cautious distance. My heart thudded in my chest and I could feel the sweat on my palms. He turned a corner, heading into a small alleyway between two buildings. But here was the strange part. When I tried to follow, there was no alley. The street simply wasn't there. There was nothing but a solid brick wall where the alley should have been. I stood there for a moment, my breath quick and shallow, trying to process what I had just seen. I had followed him down the same path he had taken, but there was no alley, no street, nothing but a dead end. I stood frozen for a long time, staring at the wall. Then I turned back, my legs suddenly shaky. I didn't want to keep walking, but I also didn't want to go back to my apartment, didn't want to face the certainty that I had just seen something unexplainable. The third rule: on rainy days, his briefcase leaves no wet marks. I've seen him in the rain a few times, only when the weather was unpredictable, when the sky had thick clouds overhead, and the air had that damp, chill feeling that follows an afternoon storm. And every time I would see him standing at the intersection, his briefcase dripping that same thick, dark fluid. But no matter how hard I looked, there were never any wet marks left on the ground beneath him. The rain would fall around him, and the dark liquid would leave a trail behind him, but nothing ever soaked into the pavement. It was like the fluid existed in a separate world, one where physics didn't apply. That's when the real fear set in. The realization that whatever he was, wherever he came from, didn't follow the normal rules of time or space. And worse, I had a sinking feeling that I had already crossed some line I couldn't return from. The fourth rule: no one else seems to notice him. This one was probably the most unnerving. Over the course of my daily jogs, I had seen plenty of neighbors out and about, walking dogs, watering their lawns, or jogging like I did. But no one ever acknowledged the man. Not once. It was as though he was invisible to everyone else, a fixture in the landscape that everyone just accepted, like a forgotten lamppost or a tree that had always been there. I started to ask people about him, casually, as if it were just another oddity I had noticed in the neighborhood. "Have you seen that man in the suit near Willowbrook and Hemlock?" I asked one neighbor, a woman named Susan who lived a few doors down. She looked at me blankly. "What man?" "The one who walks at the intersection, gray suit, briefcase." She shrugged. "I haven't seen anyone like that. Maybe you've been running too much." I wasn't running too much. I was seeing something everyone else refused to see, and the longer it went on, the more I started to believe that no one would ever be able to see him but me. The man in the gray suit wasn't just a man. He wasn't just a ghost, either. There was something far worse waiting for me, and it was only a matter of time before I learned what it wanted. The days blurred together as I grew more and more consumed by the man in the gray suit. It was like I couldn't escape him. Even when I wasn't at the intersection, his presence haunted my every thought. The image of his tall, gaunt figure standing motionless at the corner of Willowbrook Drive and Hemlock Avenue. I couldn't ignore him anymore, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something far more dangerous was lurking beneath the surface of his strange mechanical routine. At night, I couldn't sleep. I'd lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering what he was, why he was here. I even found myself second-guessing everything I had ever believed in. What if he wasn't a man at all? What if he was something else, something older, something more twisted, tied to a time or place I couldn't comprehend? The cryptic details of his movements, the strange rules that governed him, made it clear that whatever was happening wasn't just random. It was intentional, and it had a purpose. I told myself over and over that I couldn't follow him again, that it was too dangerous. But the more I tried to push him out of my mind, the more he seemed to dominate my thoughts. And so, a week after my last attempt to follow him into the non-existent alleyway, I decided to try again. The weather had been overcast all day. The air felt thick, like something was brewing. By the time 5:18 p.m. came around, I was already standing at the intersection watching. I didn't want to approach him this time. I just wanted to observe, to figure out if I could understand what was happening before it got worse. But it was impossible to just stand there. The compulsion to move closer was overwhelming. My heart raced in my chest as I crossed the street. my eyes glued to the figure standing just where he always did. The man in the gray suit was no different this time. He was tall, rigid, and still. His leather briefcase, so familiar, so haunting, was in his left hand, still dripping that dark fluid that had come to haunt my dreams. I didn't know what I expected to happen. I had convinced myself that if I just observed long enough, I would find a crack in the facade, something to explain his strange existence, but that's not what happened. At exactly 5:18 p.m., like clockwork, the man moved. His head snapped to the side, his neck jerking unnaturally, as if some unseen force had yanked it out of place. It was the first time he had ever acknowledged my presence. "You're early for your audit, Mr. Parkhurst," he said, his voice low, almost a rasp. I froze, panic flooding my system. My blood ran cold as his words echoed in my ears. He knew my name. How could he know my name? I hadn't spoken to anyone about this, not in any capacity that would have linked me to him. And then there was the question of the audit. What did he mean by that? What did he know that I didn't? Before I could react, I felt an overwhelming sense of dread. It was the kind of fear that sinks into your bones and makes it hard to breathe. It was the kind of fear you feel when you realize you've crossed a line, one that you can't uncross. The man didn't move after he spoke. His shoulders were slightly hunched, like he was waiting for something. For me to respond? For something else to happen? I had no idea. My heart pounded in my chest as I took a step back. It felt like time had stretched out around me, making everything move in slow motion. My eyes darted to the street, my hands trembling at my sides, unable to process the situation. But even as I turned my head, I could feel his presence, his eyes on me. And then, as if the world had snapped back into place, I ran. I didn't look back as I sprinted away from the intersection. My legs moved instinctively, my thoughts racing as I desperately tried to outrun whatever was happening. But even as I fled, I couldn't shake the feeling that the man in the gray suit wasn't following me. He didn't need to. It was clear now that he had already found me. I didn't stop running until I reached the safety of my apartment building. I slammed the door behind me, breathing heavily, my mind racing. My hands were shaking and I had to sit down to steady myself. I stared at the wall, replaying the scene in my head. What had just happened? What had he meant by audit? I didn't want to think about it. I didn't want to remember his face, the way his lips twisted as he spoke, the way his skin seemed to peel back from his features. But even as I tried to forget, I knew it wasn't over. The man in the gray suit had made it clear that he knew who I was. He knew my name. He knew where I lived. I spent the rest of the night researching, scouring old records online. I had to know more. Anything that could help explain what I had just experienced. It was then, as I sifted through the local history archives, that I found something that made my stomach drop. The Pemberton Asylum, Arthur Vickery, the journal entry. They've approved my transfer. I leave at 8:15. The connection was clear now, too clear. This wasn't just some strange man in a suit. This was a manifestation of something much older, something tied to the land itself. Whatever had happened to Arthur Vickery all those years ago wasn't finished, and now it had a new target. Me, I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the man's face, or rather the absence of it. The wrinkled parchment skin stretched tight over something that wasn't human. I knew I couldn't stay in Crestwood Heights much longer. I couldn't stay here not knowing what was coming. But the moment I started to make plans to leave, something struck me. The man in the gray suit had said I was early for my audit. And then, I realized something even more horrifying. I wasn't just the target. I was a part of the pattern. My arrival in this neighborhood had been no accident. I was being watched. I was being pulled into something that had been happening for years. I wasn't going anywhere. The 8:15 commuter was waiting for me, and I had no choice but to show up. The days after my encounter with the man in the gray suit felt like I was living in a fever dream. I was no longer able to separate my waking hours from the nightmare that had overtaken my life. My thoughts circled around the same question over and over. What did he want with me? Why had he singled me out? The air in Crestwood Heights felt thick with something, like the very streets themselves were holding their breath, waiting for something, waiting for me. Every time I passed the intersection of Willowbrook Drive and Hemlock Avenue, I felt the weight of his presence like a physical force pressing against my chest. But I didn't dare go back. I knew it was no use. Whatever was happening, it was beyond my control. I tried reaching out to a local historian, someone who might know more about the Pemberton Asylum and its connection to the area. Her name was Margaret Graves, a woman in her late 60s who had spent most of her life collecting bits and pieces of local history. When I told her I was researching the asylum's history, she got strangely quiet on the other end of the phone. After a long pause, she told me to come by her office the next morning. At 8 a.m. the next day, I arrived at her small, dusty office just off Main Street. She greeted me with a thin smile and motioned for me to sit down. "Did you find anything?" she asked, her voice a little too sharp. I nodded, my throat dry. "Yes. I've been reading about Arthur Vickery and his time at the asylum, and the man in the gray suit." Her eyes widened, and she quickly glanced around the room, as though checking to see if anyone was listening. "You've seen him, haven't you?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. I didn't answer right away. I didn't need to. I could see the recognition in her face, the terror that mirrored my own. "Everyone who has," she continued, "ends up following the same path. But you are the first one to ask questions." I didn't want to know what that meant, but I had to. "What's happening? Who is he? Why is he following me?" Margaret took a deep breath and pulled a faded, yellowed notebook from her desk drawer. She handed it to me, and as I flipped through its pages, I found the same name over and over again: Arthur Vickery. His handwriting, sharp and desperate, filled the pages, recounting his time at the asylum, his growing paranoia, his belief that the debts were coming due. "I should have warned you," Margaret said quietly, her gaze distant. "But you wouldn't have believed me." "Warned me about what?" "Arthur Vickery was never just a patient. He was something else, something that shouldn't have been alive, and when he died, he didn't just die, he became something else entirely. He's the one who haunts that place. But the worst part is..." Margaret stopped, her voice trembling. "He's never alone. The debts he spoke of, they don't get paid by just anyone. They need someone. They need you." My stomach twisted, and I couldn't speak for a moment. My head swam with the implications of what she had just told me. I was a part of something much darker than I had ever imagined. A debt that had been waiting for me since I first moved into the neighborhood. I stood up abruptly, my heart racing. "I have to leave. I can't..." "Don't," Margaret said, reaching out to grab my wrist. "You don't understand. Leaving won't save you. Not now." I pulled my arm away. "What do you mean? I'll just leave the neighborhood. I'll get out of here." "No," she said firmly. "You've already triggered the pattern. There's no leaving. The man in the gray suit, he'll make sure of that." I didn't know what to say. All I could think about was the ominous warning she had given me. The man in the gray suit was not just a shadow haunting my life. He was the keeper of this curse, a debt that had to be paid. The next morning I woke up to a feeling of unease, a knot in my stomach that hadn't been there before. I knew what I had to do, but I wasn't ready to face it. The 8:15 commuter was coming, and there was nothing left to do but face it. At exactly 7:42 a.m., I found myself standing at the corner of Willowbrook and Hemlock, watching the intersection with a mix of dread and resignation. It was like I had no choice anymore. I was trapped in the pattern, and the man in the gray suit would not let me escape. I had an odd sense of calm settle over me as I stood there, as if I was accepting my fate, the inevitable. I had always been a prisoner to my curiosity, and now it was time to face the consequences. At 5:18 p.m., just as I knew it would happen, the figure appeared in the distance, walking toward me with his head down, his briefcase in hand. His footsteps, silent on the gravel, echoed in my mind as if they were the ticking of a clock. counting down to my inevitable end. He was closer now, and I could see the blackened fluid still dripping from his briefcase. His face, half hidden, in shadow, seemed to stretch unnaturally under the fabric of his suit. His gaze met mine, and he stopped. "Are you ready?" His voice rasped hollow, like it came from somewhere far away. I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came. The sensation of my heart pounding in my chest was overwhelming, and my entire body trembled as if I were standing on the edge of a cliff teetering about to fall. And then, just as quickly as he had appeared, he extended his hand. A soft, slick ticket rested in his palm. The same date on the ticket, August 15th, 1963, burned into my mind like a scar. I reached for it, not sure why, not sure what I was doing anymore. And as my fingers brushed against the cold, soaked paper, I felt the pull, the inevitable pull, of something ancient, something tied to the earth beneath my feet. The last thing I saw before the world went dark was his face, stretching wider, his lips curling into a smile as his eyes went black. There would be no escape. He was something else, something that shouldn't have been alive, and when he died, he didn't just die, he became something else entirely. He's the one who haunts that place. But the worst part is... Margaret stopped, her voice trembling. He's never alone. The debts he spoke of, they don't get paid by just anyone. They need someone. They need you. My stomach twisted, and I couldn't speak for a moment. My head swam with the implications of what she had just told me. I was a part of something much darker than I had ever imagined. A debt that had been waiting for me since I first moved into the neighborhood. I stood up abruptly, my heart racing. "I have to leave. I can't." "Don't," Margaret said, reaching out to grab my wrist. "You don't understand. Leaving won't save you. Not now." I pulled my arm away. "What do you mean? I'll just leave the neighborhood. I'll get out of here." "No," she said firmly. "You've already triggered the pattern. There's no leaving. The man in the gray suit, he'll make sure of that." I didn't know what to say. All I could think about was the ominous warning she had given me. The man in the gray suit was not just a shadow haunting my life. He was the keeper of this curse, a debt that had to be paid. The next morning I woke up to a feeling of unease, a knot in my stomach that hadn't been there before. I knew what I had to do, but I wasn't ready to face it. The 8:15 commuter was coming, and there was nothing left to do but face it. At exactly 7:42 a.m., I found myself standing at the corner of Willowbrook and Hemlock, watching the intersection with a mix of dread and resignation. It was like I had no choice anymore. I was trapped in the pattern, and the man in the gray suit would not let me escape. I had an odd sense of calm settle over me as I stood there, as if I was accepting my fate, the inevitable. I had always been a prisoner to my curiosity, and now it was time to face the consequences. At 5:18 p.m., just as I knew it would happen, the figure appeared in the distance, walking toward me with his head down, his briefcase in hand. His footsteps, silent on the gravel, echoed in my mind as if they were the ticking of a clock, counting down to my inevitable end. He was closer now, and I could see the blackened fluid still dripping from his briefcase. His face, half hidden, in shadow, seemed to stretch unnaturally under the fabric of his suit. His gaze met mine, and he stopped. "Are you ready?" His voice rasped hollow, like it came from somewhere far away. I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came. The sensation of my heart pounding in my chest was overwhelming, and my entire body trembled as if I were standing on the edge of a cliff teetering about to fall. And then, just as quickly as he had appeared, he extended his hand. A soft, slick ticket rested in his palm. The same date on the ticket, August 15th, 1963, burned into my mind like a scar. I reached for it, not sure why, not sure what I was doing anymore. And as my fingers brushed against the cold, soaked paper, I felt the pull, the inevitable pull, of something ancient, something tied to the earth beneath my feet. The last thing I saw before the world went dark was his face, stretching wider, his lips curling into a smile as his eyes went black. There would be no escape. It's funny how you can drive a road 1,000 times and never truly see it. That's what I used to think about Ridge Road. A long, twisted stretch of asphalt cutting through dense woods and crumbling stone walls. It connects Blackwater to Milford, two towns that feel like they belong to different centuries. There's nothing special about it. Not during the day, anyway. It's just a road like any other, with patches of broken tarmac and faded yellow lines. The kind of place where you could fall asleep at the wheel if you weren't careful. But at night, that's a different story. I didn't know much about the stories people whispered about the road when I first moved to Milford in 2017. It wasn't until I started working the night shift at the paper plant that I heard the first mention of Eliza Mayhew, the woman who disappeared in 1983. People spoke of her like a ghost, a warning more than a story. There were always rumors about Ridge Road, like it was cursed somehow. And every time someone mentioned it, there was this unspoken tension in their voices, like they were trying not to say too much. I thought it was all nonsense. I wasn't, the superstitious type. If a person vanished, there was a logical explanation for it, right? Mechanical failure, poor weather, a random accident. People didn't just disappear without a trace. I'd driven that stretch of road dozens of times, and nothing had ever seemed out of the ordinary. That was, of course, until October 19th, 2018. It was a cold night, and the kind of fog that made it hard to see much further than the end of your headlights had rolled in. I remember feeling exhausted after my shift. I'd worked longer than I'd planned, and the thought of getting home to a warm bed was the only thing keeping me going as I made my way along Ridge Road. I had just crossed the old stone bridge near the edge of the woods when I saw her. A flicker, in the high beams a flash of white. At first I thought it was some kind of animal, a deer or something darting into the road. But as I came closer, I saw her clearly. A woman in a white dress, standing barefoot in the middle of the road. I hit, the brakes hard. My heart hammered in my chest as I swerved to avoid her, the tires screeching against the wet asphalt. For a split second I thought I was going to crash, but somehow I regained control of the car and slammed it into the shoulder. I threw the car into park and just stared out the window. I'm not sure what I was expecting to see. I mean, I knew. There couldn't have been anyone there. It wasn't possible. I hadn't seen her at the last second. It wasn't a trick of the lights. But as I looked back in the rearview mirror, my pulse still racing, I didn't see her crumpled in the road. She was in my back seat. Her face was barely visible, her hair hanging in wet strands over her face. Her head tilted at a weird angle, almost like she was stretching her neck to look at me. I could hear the faint sound of her breathing, like she was gasping for air, but she didn't make a sound. I froze. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. My mind raced, trying to comprehend what I was seeing, trying to figure out if this was real. Was I losing my mind, or had I somehow imagined it? I glanced back toward the rearview mirror again, trying to make sense of what I'd just seen, and just like that, she was gone. I jerked my head around, my breath catching in my throat. The back seat was empty, but the damp imprint of a body was left on the leather seat, a shape that lingered for a few seconds before slowly fading into nothing. I sat there for what felt like an eternity, my hands shaking as I fumbled to start the car again. I didn't know what I was feeling. Relief, fear, disbelief. I had to leave. I had to get out of there. But when I finally managed to drive away, the weight of the moment was still with me, pressing down like a heavy fog. My mind raced with questions, but nothing seemed to make sense. What the hell had just happened? When I pulled into the gas station 10 miles down the road, I tried to shake off the panic that was still settling in my chest. The clerk barely looked up as I stepped inside, but when I was about to pay for gas, he paused, his eyes narrowing for a second. "You drive Ridge Road, didn't you?" he asked, his voice low. I didn't answer right away. There was something about the way he asked, like he already knew the answer. Something in his eyes made me nervous, and I couldn't shake the feeling that he knew exactly what I had seen. "You passed by a woman, didn't you?" he added, as if it wasn't a question. I nodded. My voice caught in my throat. Yeah, I did. He leaned in a little closer, lowering his voice even more. You're not the first one. Last month, another guy swore he saw the same thing. Said she was standing in the road, all pale and staring. You sure you're all right? I stared at him for a long moment, trying to make sense of what he was saying. I think so, I muttered, paying for the gas and quickly walking back to my car. The words he'd said felt like a weight in my stomach, heavy and pressing down. As I pulled away from the gas station and back onto Ridge Road, the words kept echoing in my mind. You're not the first one. That night would be the first, and last time I would ever drive Ridge Road again. Little did I know it wasn't the last time I'd ever see her, but that's a story for another night. A story I'm not sure I'll ever be able to finish. I didn't want to go back down Ridge Road after that night. Hell, I didn't want to drive anywhere near it. But the world doesn't stop because you've seen something that rattles your bones, so I kept on going to work, day in and day out, though the thought of that road gnawed at me every time I turned onto it. I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd missed something, that I hadn't fully understood what had happened to me that night. But there were other things too. Things that made my skin crawl when I remembered them. The gas station clerk's words, for instance. You're not the first one. The more I thought about it, the more I started to feel like a fool. Who was this woman in white? Was she really just some tragic figure haunting the road, searching for a ride that would never come? Or was she something worse? Something more dangerous? I tried to forget about it. I tried to chalk it up to the exhaustion from my shift, to the stress, to the long drive, to anything other than what I knew deep down. I had seen something real that night. And the worst part? I wasn't the only one. It was 2 days after that encounter when I had the dream. I don't remember much of it, but I woke up in a cold sweat, heart racing, breath shallow. I don't know why I remembered it so vividly, maybe because it was so unlike any dream I'd ever had before. I was driving down Ridge Road again, but this time it was different. It wasn't the fog or the quiet emptiness of the place. It was her, Eliza. She was standing by the side of the road, her face tilted toward me, her white dress almost glowing in the moonlight. I slammed on the brakes. I didn't swerve this time. I didn't veer to the shoulder. I didn't do anything. I just stopped the car. She walked toward me, slow and deliberate, her bare feet making no sound against the road. Her face was shadowed, but I could see her eyes, the black, hollow voids that seemed to swallow the light. She moved closer, so close that I could hear her breathing. The smell of damp earth and gasoline flooded the car again, just like the night I'd seen her. Then she whispered my name. Daniel. I tried to scream, but nothing came out. I was frozen. My body wouldn't obey my commands. Her hand reached out, and I felt the coldness of it, icy, unnatural. I could feel her fingers brush against the glass of the window, and that was when I woke up. I sat up in bed, gasping for air, drenched in sweat, my heart pounding in my ears. I didn't want to go back to sleep, but I couldn't stop my eyes from closing. All I could think about was the dream, the way she'd looked at me, the way she'd been waiting for me to come back. That's when I knew. I wasn't just some passerby. I wasn't just some random guy driving down the road. I had become part of her story. Whether I wanted to or not, I was now a part of whatever it was that had taken her life. The next few days passed in a blur. I tried to go back to normal. Tried to shake off the thoughts of Ridge Road, but I couldn't. The more I tried, the worse it got. At night, I could hear her whispering in the back of my mind, calling my name. Her presence lingered in the corners of my vision, just out of reach. And then there was the radio. It was around midnight one night, when I was driving back from work again. I'd barely made it halfway down Ridge Road when the static hit. It came from nowhere, sudden, sharp, like someone had turned on the radio without my permission. And then I heard it, a woman's voice. Soft, lilting and haunting. She was singing. I couldn't make out the words, but the melody was strange, like something from another time, another place. It was the kind of song that would make your skin crawl if you really listened to it. Tried to turn the volume down, but the knob wouldn't move. It was stuck. My fingers hovered over the dial, but it wouldn't budge. The voice grew louder. "Daniel," it whispered between the notes. "Come closer." I don't know how long. I sat there, frozen in my car, the voice filling every inch of the space around me. The radio crackled again, louder this time. My head pounded, my breath shallow. I couldn't think, I couldn't breathe, I couldn't move. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. The radio went silent. The car was still. The only sound was the hum of the engine and the rush of blood in my ears. I didn't look back. I didn't even stop. I just slammed my foot on the gas and didn't stop until I reached the town. That was the last time I ever drove Ridge Road after dark. I didn't go back to work for a few days after that. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed, that something had followed me home. I was living in a house that had begun to feel like a prison, the walls closing in on me every time I tried to rest. I should have known better than to think that I could escape it. But the worst part? I wasn't the only one who had heard the voice. The clerk at the gas station knew. The people who had been there before me, they all knew. They'd heard her too. They had all seen her. And the more I tried to forget, the more I realized there was no escaping Ridge Road. And if you listened long enough, you could hear her sing. I think I heard her calling me again tonight. And this time, I don't think she'll let me go. The road had always felt wrong. That's the only way I can put it. The pavement, cracked and uneven, stretching for miles through thick pine woods that felt more like a veil hiding something behind it. Ridge Road had never been the kind of place you would want to drive down at night. It wasn't just the isolation, or the weird feeling of being watched. It was something deeper, something in the air that made the hairs on your neck stand up long before the first flicker of headlights showed up on the horizon. But even with that sense of dread gnawing at me, I still found myself on that road more often than I'd like to admit. I'd always try to drive fast, trying to outrun whatever was pulling me toward that stretch of highway. But you can't outrun something that's already inside you. It was October 19th, the 1-year anniversary of the first time I'd seen her, the woman in white. The same date, a year later. I didn't even realize the date had passed until I found myself sitting at the wheel, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles were white. The city was already far behind me, the glowing lights from Milford fading into the rearview mirror, swallowed up by the oppressive darkness of Ridge Road. I could feel my pulse quicken as I drove. The soft hum of my car's engine felt strangely loud against the stillness around me. Every turn of the wheel made the unease grow. It wasn't until I passed the old stone wall, the one on the sharp curve right before the old oak tree, that I realized I had been driving on autopilot. I hadn't even been thinking about it, but now that I was on Ridge Road again, I couldn't turn back. Then I saw her. She was standing by the side of the road as if waiting for someone to pass, just like the first time. The same white lace dress, the same dark hair falling over her face. My heart skipped a beat. I told myself it was just a trick of the headlights, the way the light flickered off the trees. But deep down, I knew better. I wasn't imagining it. I slammed my foot on the brake, tires screeching as I pulled over to the side of the road, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip the wheel. My breath was shallow and I couldn't swallow. The sound of the engine idling seemed too loud in the eerie silence of the road. I couldn't move. She was closer now, just a few feet from the car. She hadn't moved, but there was something different in the air, a heavy stillness. I told myself to keep going, to not get out of the car, but it was too late. I was already out of the car before I could even think about it. "Eliza?" My voice sounded too loud, even to my own ears, but I couldn't stop myself. My heart was hammering in my chest as I took a step toward her. My feet felt heavy, as if the road itself was trying to hold me back. She didn't respond. Her eyes, those hollow black eyes, were locked onto mine, her expression unreadable. "Eliza Mayhew," I said again, louder this time, trying to steady my voice. "What do you want from me?" I wanted to turn away. I wanted to get back in the car, to leave, to never think about Ridge Road again. But I couldn't. There was something in her gaze that rooted me to the spot, something that made me feel like I wasn't in control anymore. Suddenly, she tilted her head, that strange, unnatural tilt, and took a step toward me. Her feet were bare, her dress swaying in the wind, but the air around her was thick and cold. The frost from the previous winter seemed to cling to her like a second skin, like she was part of the earth itself, a thing too old and too tangled, in the land to leave. "I don't want to be alone," she whispered, her voice barely a breath. It was a voice I could barely hear over the rush of my own blood in my ears, but it was there. And then she took another step, close enough now that I could see the ragged edge of her dress, the dirt smeared along her ankles. I froze. My pulse hammered in my throat. And then, in a voice that made my teeth ache, she spoke again. "You're not going anywhere." Her words hung in the air like smoke, curling and twisting in ways that didn't make sense. My body was paralyzed. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. The world around me felt smaller, closing in. Her presence was suffocating. "Take my place," she said, the words dripping with desperation. "Please, take my place." I couldn't answer. I couldn't speak. I couldn't even look away. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it. The car. My car, still parked by the side of the road, the driver's door wide open. I hadn't left it like that. The back seat. The door slammed shut with an unnatural force. I didn't move. I couldn't move. Not until I heard the faint sound of her breathing right behind me. I turned. There she was. But she wasn't standing anymore. She was crouched low to the ground, her face twisted and contorted into something that didn't look human. Her mouth was wide, too wide, and her lips split into a grin that made my stomach churn. I could see the blood underneath her skin, as if something inside her was rotting. I could feel it. The pressure, the weight of it pressing down on me. The lights of my car flickered on, the engine roaring to life. Without thinking, I turned and ran, my legs moving before my brain even knew what was happening. I didn't look back. I didn't stop running. And when I finally made it to Milford, my legs burning, my heart still racing, I didn't stop. I didn't even slow down. I just kept running. Somewhere in the distance, I could swear I heard her voice. "Come back," she whispered. "You'll come back. They always come back." I didn't go home that night. I didn't sleep. I just kept thinking about the car, the thing, in the back seat, and the way she had whispered my name. The next morning, I couldn't drive down Ridge Road anymore. I couldn't face it, and I couldn't shake the feeling that she was still out there waiting for me, waiting for someone else to come, someone else to take her place. And I knew, in that moment, that I never truly escaped Ridge Road. It had always been watching me. I don't know what drove me to return. After everything, I should have known better than to tempt fate, to go back to that cursed stretch of Ridge Road. But there I was once again, with my hands gripping the steering wheel of my old sedan, the engine humming under the night sky. The road ahead seemed endless, dark, almost infinite in its quiet desolation. The rational part of me screamed to turn around, to just drive back to Milford, to leave this twisted road behind once and for all. But I couldn't. Something deep inside, me, something raw and primal pulled me toward it. It was like the road had a grip on me, something I couldn't explain, like it was calling me back for reasons I didn't fully understand. The headlights illuminated the pines on either side, their dark trunks like looming sentinels. They seemed to reach toward the sky, but beneath the canopy of shadows there was something unnerving about their stillness, a silence that felt too heavy. No crickets, no animals rustling in the underbrush, just the weight of the dark pressing down. The road seemed like an old memory, one I couldn't quite shake off. It felt as though the air itself held the echoes of what had happened here, lingering, like dust in a forgotten corner. The houses were few and far between. The town of Milford, with its lights and noise, felt miles away, and that solitude brought a strange unease that tightened in my chest. I remembered the first time I'd seen her, Eliza Mayhew. That night had been so real, so visceral, and yet so impossible. I had slammed my foot on the gas pedal, trying to outrun the terror that filled my heart, but no matter how fast I drove, the memory of her stayed with me. The feeling of her presence in the back seat, her cold, damp breath, and the lingering smell of wet earth that filled the car. It haunted me, whispered to me in quiet moments, pulling me toward this cursed stretch of highway. The trees here were dense, almost closing in on the road, making it feel as though I were driving through an endless tunnel of branches. The car's headlights flickered briefly, casting a ghostly glow on the asphalt. I couldn't help but glance at the rearview mirror, half expecting to see something in the distance, but there was nothing, just the long stretch of road behind me, fading into shadow. Then the flicker of movement. My heart skipped a beat. For a moment, I thought it was just my mind playing tricks on me, a shadow in the corner of my vision. But no, there it was again, clearer this time. A figure, a woman. She was standing in the middle of the road, her white dress glowing faintly in the pale light of the moon. Her long, dark hair hung loosely, wet and tangled, obscuring her face. She didn't move, just stood there as though frozen in place. It felt as though time had stopped, like the world was holding its breath. I slammed my foot down on the brake, the tires screeching as the car came to an abrupt stop. The sound of the engine whined, then faded into the stillness, leaving an eerie quiet hanging in the air. For a moment I couldn't breathe. My eyes locked onto her figure, standing motionless in the road. I should have driven past. I should have kept going, ignored the unsettling urge to stop. But I didn't. I opened the door slowly, the night air freezing as it rushed in. The wind carried the scent of wet earth and rotting leaves, a musty, almost decayed smell. The hairs on the back of my neck prickled, and I took a hesitant step forward. My boots crunched against the gravel, every sound seeming amplified in the still night. "Hello?" My voice came out barely above a whisper. I couldn't help it. My throat was tight, and the words felt unnatural on my tongue. I didn't want to call attention to myself, but there was no turning back now. I had to know. The woman didn't respond. She just stood there, her back to me, her form shrouded in the misty darkness. A part of me wanted to run, to jump back into the car and drive as far away from this cursed place as I could. But I couldn't. I felt an invisible pull toward her, like a thread drawing me in. And then she moved. Not in a natural, human way. It was slow at first, like her body was resisting movement, creaking and stiff. Her head turned, and as she faced me, the air seemed to freeze. The pale moonlight illuminated her face, and my blood ran cold. Her eyes, black, solid black. There was nothing else. No whites, no pupils, just endless, empty blackness. And then her lips parted, her voice a soft rasp. "You came back," she said, the words almost drowned by the wind that began to pick up around us. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. The words caught in my throat, and I felt an overwhelming sensation of cold, like I had stepped into a frozen wasteland. It wasn't just the air, it was her. She was freezing everything around her, pressing the chill into my bones. "I told you not to look," she whispered again, her voice now a bit stronger, more urgent. "You're not supposed to see me." I opened my mouth, trying to find words, but nothing came out. It was like my mind was no longer connected to my body. "Why?" I managed to choke out, my voice barely audible in the howling wind. "What do you want from me?" She took a slow step forward. The movement was unnerving, deliberate, almost mechanical. There was no haste in her steps, but there was something predatory about them. She didn't walk like a normal person. It was more like she was gliding, her feet barely touching the ground. "You should have stayed away," she said, and the air seemed to thicken around us. "You never should have come back." I stumbled backward, the fear inside me now fully realizing itself. There was no logic left, no reasoning, only panic. But before I could turn to flee, she reached out, her hand brushing the edge of my sleeve. Cold. So cold it felt like it was burning. My heart slammed in my chest and I gasped for air, desperate to escape. But the world around me had changed. The road, the trees, everything had gone silent. And then, like the snap of a branch in the forest, she was gone. 1 second she was there, standing before me. And the next, empty road. No footprints. Nothing. I stood there, frozen, staring at the place where she had been. My breath came in shallow gasps, my hands trembling as I turned back toward my car. The grip on the door was stiff and my hands felt clumsy as I fumbled to climb in. As the engine roared to life, I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see her standing there, watching, waiting. But there was nothing. I couldn't shake the feeling that she was still out there, that she was with me in the car. Her warning lingered in my mind. You never should have come back. As I drove away, the sound of static crackled through the radio, just like the last time. And somewhere deep inside, I knew it wasn't over. The road had claimed me, it would always claim me. And now there was no escape. The days that followed were a blur. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. That night on Ridge Road, Eliza Mayhew had made her presence known more clearly than ever. Her warning still echoed in my mind, the words circling like a vulture waiting to swoop in and claim its next meal. You never should have come back, she'd said. And now, there was no escaping her. I could feel it, an invisible thread that tied me to that desolate stretch of road, as if it had become a part of me, a part of my life. And as much as I wanted, to walk away, as much as I wanted to forget everything that had happened, I couldn't. There were the dreams, too. Dreams where I found myself driving down Ridge Road again, the car moving slowly, almost hypnotically, as if it were being guided by some unseen force. In those dreams, I could hear her, Eliza, whispering my name, her voice a soft, persistent hum in the background. I could feel her in the back seat even though I knew I was alone. The sensation was overwhelming, suffocating. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, my body rigid with fear, and for a moment, I'd wonder if I was still asleep, if I'd ever truly woken up. I tried to ignore the pull. I tried to go about my days as if nothing had happened. But Ridge Road stayed in my mind, a permanent fixture that wouldn't be erased. I tried to distance myself from the memory, to tell myself that I was just being paranoid, that there was nothing out there, that it was all in my head. But deep down, I knew the truth. I was drawn to it. And the road would always be there, waiting for me to return. It had been nearly a week since the last encounter, but I couldn't sleep. I couldn't escape the nagging feeling that Eliza was still out there, that she was still watching me, waiting for the moment when I would break, when I would be compelled to return. I didn't know if it was fear or a strange, twisted curiosity, but I found myself at the wheel again, just past midnight. The road stretched before me, the black pavement almost swallowing the headlights. The pines on either side loomed like silent watchers, their dark silhouettes giving the entire stretch of road an eerie, claustrophobic feel. The night was cold, the air thick with a heavy fog that seemed to hang in the atmosphere, barely allowing any sound to reach my ears. I thought about turning back. I could have. I could have driven straight to Milford, gone home, and never returned to this cursed road again. But I didn't. The drive felt like it was leading me somewhere I couldn't avoid, like there was something at the end of the road I needed to see, or maybe something I needed to do. As I approached the familiar stretch of Ridge Road where Eliza had appeared that first night, my grip tightened on the steering wheel. I slowed the car. I shouldn't have, but I couldn't help it. The headlights illuminated the empty stretch of asphalt. No cars, no movement. Just the trees, the fog, the endless silence. I held my breath. I waited. And then, just as I feared, I saw her, standing in the middle of the road barefoot, her white dress flowing around her like a ghostly veil. Her dark hair hung in wet strands, concealing her face, but I could feel her presence. That same, unnerving energy, the way she seemed to bend the world around her, distorting reality with every step. She didn't move. She just stood there, still as stone, her form glowing faintly in the dim light. I didn't stop this time. I didn't even slow down. I was past the point of fear. There was no fear left to feel. She was here, and I wasn't going to stop. I couldn't stop. As I approached her, I turned the wheel sharply, driving straight toward her. But she didn't flinch. She didn't move. Her eyes remained hidden beneath the dark curtain of her hair, but I could feel them on me, watching, waiting. My foot pressed harder on the gas pedal. I didn't want to hurt her. I didn't want to hurt anyone. But something inside me, something dark and primal, told me I had to keep going, I had to push through. And for that split second, it was like time slowed down, like everything was suspended in that one moment of decision. At the last possible second, I slammed my foot on the brake. The car screeched to a halt, just inches from her. My heart was hammering in my chest. My breath came in quick, shallow gasps. I couldn't move, I couldn't breathe, the air felt thick, the world felt wrong. I looked up, she was gone. Just like that. No trace. No footsteps. No rustling of her dress in the wind. I sat there, frozen in the driver's seat, my hands shaking on the wheel. The headlights of my car illuminated nothing but the empty road. It was like she'd never been there at all. But I knew better. I knew she was still there. Somewhere. Watching. I should have been relieved. I should have driven away, gotten out of there before it was too late. But I couldn't bring myself to start the car. Not yet. And then, as if from nowhere, the radio crackled to life. A soft melodic tune filled the car, its static laced with a voice, her voice. It wasn't clear at first, but then it was. She was singing, not in words, but in a low hum, like a lullaby that made my skin crawl. I didn't recognize the song. It wasn't familiar, but it didn't matter. It was her. I didn't dare look in the rearview mirror. I didn't want to see her. I knew she was there. I could feel it. Her presence, like a shadow in the back seat. I took one last look down the road, then slammed my foot on the gas pedal, pushing the car forward. As I drove away, I couldn't stop shaking. I didn't dare look back. And when I reached the end of Ridge Road, I didn't stop. I kept driving. I didn't know if I would ever stop driving, because I knew, deep down, that I could never escape her. I would always be drawn back to that stretch of highway, to that woman in white, to that chilling voice. And if you ever drive down Ridge Road, you might see her too. But be warned, if you hear the radio crackle and the singing start, don't look. Just drive, faster, and never look back. When my mother, Eleanor, and I moved into the house on Hemlock Street, I was only 6 years old. It seemed like the perfect home. Old, but full of charm, with its tall windows, squeaky floors, and a dusty old swing set in the backyard. I remember the way it looked as we drove up the long, winding driveway, the trees in the yard standing like silent sentinels. It felt like something out of a storybook, albeit a storybook that wasn't quite finished yet. Mom had always told me that we were starting fresh. We had to. After Dad left, everything was upended. She said that this house, this old Victorian, would be a new beginning, a chance to breathe again. I was excited. Sure, it was big and creaky, but it had character, something my old bedroom in our cramped apartment lacked. There were plenty of places to explore, endless hallways, rooms full of forgotten treasures, the attic which we were told never to open, and, of course, the backyard where the swing set stood. It was beautiful in its own broken way. But that first day when we stepped over the threshold, we had no idea what kind of history was buried within the walls. The Winter family's tragedy wasn't something anyone spoke about openly, but it hung in the air unspoken, like the smell of mildew that had settled deep within the house. I would learn much later after I'd grown up about Sarah Winter, how she vanished one night in 1932 during a blizzard, and was later found dead in the walls, her fingers raw from clawing at the plaster. No one really talked about the details, but every town has its ghosts, and this house, our house, had one. I was too young to understand all that back then. All I knew was that something was wrong with the house. It started slowly. At first there were the little things, a creak of the floorboard when no one was there, a door that would open and close by itself, the occasional flicker of the lights when we'd pass by the hallway. Nothing major, just enough to make me look over my shoulder. But it wasn't until I met Sarah that I realized there was something darker at play. It happened on a rainy afternoon. The kind where the sky presses down on you, dark and heavy, and the rain slaps against the windows like tiny hands. I was sitting in my room, staring out at the backyard when I saw her. Pale, her hair in two frayed braids, wearing a tattered blue dress. She was standing at the edge of my closet watching me. She smiled at me and I smiled back. At first I didn't say anything. I thought she was just a neighbor's kid or someone from school. But then she spoke. Her voice was soft, almost like a whisper that rustled through the air. "Come play with me." I didn't know why, but I felt safe. Something about her quiet presence, felt familiar. It didn't occur to me to be scared. I was used to playing alone in my room, and if I had an imaginary friend, so be it. But there was something different about Sarah. Something off. "Who are you?" I asked, inching closer to her. Her smile widened, and she motioned for me to follow her. "I'm Sarah," she said simply. "You can play with me, but only when your mom isn't looking." I tilted my head. "Why not?" "Because," she said, her voice dipping low as if sharing a secret, "grown-ups can't see me." I didn't question her. After all, I was 6. What did I know about the rules of invisible friends? Later, I told Mom about Sarah. I told her about the games we played, how Sarah would lead me to hidden places in the house where I could find toys or candy no one had left there. She just smiled and nodded, like all parents do when their kids tell stories of imaginary friends. But things started getting strange. Mom found muddy footprints leading from my closet to my bed. The floors had been freshly cleaned and the doors were locked. There was no way I could have gone outside and tracked mud in. Mom asked me if I had been sneaking out of my room at night, but I was adamant that I hadn't. She thought it was just my mind playing tricks on me, that I was imagining things. But then came the mirror. It was just another game that Sarah had suggested. She told me to hold up a mirror and show her how I looked. I thought it was strange at the time, but I didn't think much of it. What kid wouldn't want to see their reflection, especially in a big, old mirror? I lifted the mirror and saw, not me. It was Sarah, except she wasn't smiling. Her face was twisted, her mouth stretched wide in a grin that didn't seem possible. And her eyes, black, endless voids that swallowed the light, stared back at me. I screamed, and the mirror fell to the floor with a crash. I ran from the room and didn't look back. Mom came rushing in, her face pale when I told her what I had seen. But she dismissed it as a bad dream, just my overactive imagination, she said. "There's no such thing as monsters, Lily," she told me gently, brushing my hair out of my face. But I wasn't convinced. Something was wrong. Something was wrong with the house. Something was wrong with Sarah, and as much as I wanted to forget, I couldn't. The feeling, the cold, sinking feeling that wrapped around me, only grew worse each day. But I was just a kid, and kids have a way of brushing off their fears, of convincing themselves that nothing is truly wrong, that nothing is real. So, I played along. I smiled and nodded when Sarah wanted to play her games, but deep down I knew she wasn't just an imaginary friend, and neither was the thing that watched us from the walls. At first, Sarah's presence was nothing more than an odd, quiet companion. She would show up on rainy days or when the wind howled through the cracks in the old windows. But each time she seemed more real. And as she grew more familiar, so did the games. I remember one afternoon, when the light dimmed and the house felt too still, Sarah led me into the attic. The door was always locked before, but Sarah seemed to know ways around things that I didn't. She pointed to the attic stairs with a smile, saying, "Come see the things up there." I hesitated, feeling the weight of the air in the hallway, thick, with dust and secrets. Mom said the attic's off limits. I murmured, still holding onto the banister. But Sarah just giggled, a sound that made my skin crawl a little. "Your mom can't see us, I'll show you something." That was all she needed to say. I followed her, my heart thudding in my chest as the stairs creaked beneath my tiny feet. The attic smelled like old books and forgotten memories, the kind of place where you felt like someone, or something, was watching you. The air up there was colder than the rest of the house, the floorboards uneven and splintered underfoot. Sarah was already at the far end of the attic, crouched down beside a wooden chest. "Look," she said, lifting the lid with a soft grunt. Inside, there were things I didn't recognize: old, tattered clothing, broken dolls with missing eyes, and stacks of yellowed letters. The chest felt ancient, like it belonged to someone long forgotten. But what caught my eye the most was a dusty mirror propped up against the wall beside it. It wasn't a large mirror, but its frame was carved with strange symbols, sharp lines like scratches twisted and knotted in intricate patterns. Sarah seemed to notice my gaze, and she smiled. "That's mine," she whispered. "I like to." "Watch." My fingers twitched, an inexplicable urge pulling me toward the glass. But Sarah stopped me, her hand pressed firmly on my arm. "Not yet," she said. "Not until you're ready." I didn't know what that meant, but I could feel it. That chill creeping down my spine again. There was something wrong about that mirror, something about Sarah's fascination with it. I didn't want to ask any more questions, not if it meant finding out things I wasn't ready for. But the games didn't stop with the attic. Sarah began to appear more frequently, at first in the corners of my room, standing silently by the window or at the edge of the door. Her eyes, dark as a starless night, would follow my every move, never blinking. It felt like she was waiting for something, watching for the right moment to strike. One evening, as I sat at my desk doing homework, Sarah appeared again, this time behind me in the reflection of my lamp. I turned around quickly, but there was nothing there. My heart skipped in my chest, and I tried to focus back on my work, pushing the feeling aside. "Why do you always watch me?" I asked, half laughing, half nervous. The room felt too cold, the shadows in the corners too deep. Sarah's voice was a whisper, yet it echoed in my mind as if she were right behind me. "I like to see how you change, how you grow. I want to see you become like me." My stomach twisted at the words, the fear creeping in again. "What do you mean?" I whispered back, too afraid to even look over my shoulder. But Sarah didn't answer. Instead, she simply smiled. A smile that grew wider, impossibly wider, until it seemed to stretch beyond what a smile should. And then, just as quickly, she was gone, vanished without a sound, leaving only the faint scent of something metallic in the air. That night when I lay in bed, the shadows felt more oppressive. The sound of the wind outside sounded distant, muffled, as though something was pressing against the walls of the house, preventing the world from coming through. The darkness seemed deeper in my room, and I couldn't shake the feeling that Sarah was watching from the corner. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to pretend she wasn't there, but the image of her face, her black, empty eyes, flashed behind my lids. The next day, I found something strange in my closet. The door had been shut tight the night before, but when I opened it now, there on the floor was a small pile of dirt, fresh dirt, like it had been dug up recently. I blinked, staring at it, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. There was no way this could have been there before. I looked around the room, feeling as though something was waiting just out of view. It wasn't until I noticed the faint, sticky residue on the inside of the closet door that I understood what had happened. Someone, or something, had been in here while I slept. But when I went to tell Mom, she just shook her head, brushing it off as my overactive imagination. That's the thing with adults. They always find ways to explain things away. The dirt? Just something from the garden. The cold spots in the house? Old windows, she said. But I knew there was something in this house that no one else could see. Something waiting in the shadows. That night, I heard her voice again. this time from the walls. It wasn't clear at first, just a whisper, a murmur that seemed to float in the space between waking and sleeping. But then, as the minutes ticked by, the whispers grew louder, clearer. "Let me in," Sarah said. Froze, my heart hammering in my chest. It was coming from the walls right behind me, like she was on the other side. My room felt smaller, tighter, and I could feel the pressure building up around me. "Please let me in." And then, just as quickly as it had come, the whispering stopped. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me from the walls, waiting for the moment I would let it out. But I didn't want to open that door. Not yet. Not until I understood what Sarah wanted. After the incident with the dirt in the closet, I started to feel like the walls were closing in on me. It wasn't just Sarah anymore, it was the house itself, the creaks, the groans, the sense that it was alive, watching, waiting for something. I couldn't escape it. The whispering continued, soft and insistent, as if the walls themselves were talking to me, urging me to listen. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was just my imagination. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. There was something in this house. Something that had been here long before I ever moved in. Long before Lily or her mother had stepped through the door. Sarah's presence was becoming more intense, more demanding. The games had stopped feeling like fun. She no longer just watched me play. She was in my face now, her breath cold on my neck, her eyes following my every move. I could hear her breathing, ragged and slow, behind me when I was alone in my room. Sometimes I could almost feel her standing beside me, just out of view. I spent the days trying to keep busy, hoping that the more I ignored her, the more she'd go away. I tried to talk to my mom about it, but she didn't seem to hear me. She would tell me that I was just tired or that the house was old and settling. "Old houses make strange noises, honey," she'd say, brushing my concerns aside. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. It was like Sarah was getting stronger, and it wasn't just her presence that I was starting to feel. There was something in the air, a coldness that seemed to seep into my skin. The house, once just a home, now felt like a cage. One night, it all came to a head. I had been playing alone in my room, sitting on the floor and pushing toy cars around, trying to pretend that everything was normal, trying to pretend Sarah wasn't there. But the silence was overwhelming, so I decided to look into the mirror above my dresser, something I had avoided for days. I wasn't sure why, but the pull to look into it was strong, almost magnetic. I told myself I'd be fine. The moment my reflection appeared in the glass, I knew something was wrong. My face looked normal, just me, a little girl with wide eyes and messy hair. But there was something strange about the background. The reflection of the room behind me was distorted. The furniture warped, and the shadows were darker than they should have been. I stepped closer to the mirror, trying to understand what I was seeing. And that's when it happened. Sarah appeared in the reflection, standing right behind me, her hair tangled and her dress torn at the edges. Her eyes were black, like deep holes in her face. She was smiling, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It was wide, stretching unnaturally, almost like her face was going to split open. She reached out a hand toward me, her fingers too long, the tips of them hovering just above my shoulder. I turned around, heart racing, but there was nothing there. The room was empty, just the way it had been when I walked in. I felt a knot form in my stomach. I turned back to the mirror, and Sarah was still there, smiling. She didn't speak, but her lips parted slightly, as though she was about to say something. I stared at her for what felt like hours, too terrified to look away. The room around me seemed to shift and twist as I gazed into the glass, and for a moment it felt like I was sinking, like the reflection was pulling me in. But then, a voice broke through the haze. "Don't look at her." My mom's voice came from behind me, startling me. "She's not real, Lily. Don't listen to her." I spun around, my heart hammering. My mom was standing in the doorway, her face pale. "You've been playing with her again, haven't you?" she asked, her voice strained. I didn't mean to. She keeps showing up." My words tumbled out in a rush. Mom stepped into the room, her hands shaking slightly as she reached for my arm. "We need to leave, Lily. We need to leave now." I didn't understand. Leave? But it's my room. It's my house. Her eyes looked distant, haunted, and for the first time I saw the fear in them. She looked at the mirror and back at me, her gaze locking onto mine. I don't want to lose you too. I don't want you to disappear like she did. I stared at her, confused. Who? Sarah Winter, she whispered, her voice barely audible. She died in this house, Lily, and now she's trying to take you. I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. But she's just a little girl. She's my friend. Mom shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. She was never your friend. She was a spirit, a trapped soul. She wants to take you with her. She's been waiting for you. The chill in the room deepened, and for the first time I could feel it. An overwhelming presence pressing in from all sides. I felt like I was being suffocated, like the walls were closing in around me. The whispering began again, louder now, more insistent, as if Sarah herself was urging me to come closer, to let her in. Mom grabbed my hand, pulling me away from the mirror. We're leaving now. We rushed down the stairs, my heart pounding in my chest. The house seemed to close around us, the air thick with an unnatural heaviness. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to shift and writhe as though they were alive, watching us. I felt like I was being pulled in all directions, torn between the real world and whatever was lurking just beyond it. We grabbed our coats and my mom ushered me out of the house. But as I passed the doorway, I glanced back, and for a brief second, I saw her, Sarah, standing at the top of the stairs watching us with those black, empty eyes. She whispered, her voice barely audible, "You can't leave me." And then the door slammed shut behind us. As we drove away, I looked back at the house one last time. The shadows seemed to reach for me, but I knew I had to leave it behind. But Sarah's whisper still echoed in my mind, haunting me, pulling me back to a place I never wanted to visit again. Because once you've been touched by the darkness, it never truly lets you go. We didn't talk much after we left the house. There was nothing to say. I could feel my mom's anxiety building with every mile we drove, and I didn't have the words to explain what I'd experienced. I wanted to scream at her that I'd seen Sarah, that she wasn't just a story or a ghost. She was real, and she was in my head, in my heart, pulling me back toward the house. But the look in my mom's eyes was enough to silence me. She was scared too. She didn't know what to do. Neither of us did. We spent the next few days in a small motel on the outskirts of town. It wasn't much, just a dingy room with faded wallpaper and a musty smell that made me nauseous. But it was safe. It was away from that house. Away from whatever evil had been hiding inside those walls. I tried to convince myself it was over, that I was safe, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. The shadows, the whispers, they were still with me, lurking just beneath the surface of my thoughts. Mom kept herself busy during the day, trying to find us a new place to stay. She said we'd move on, that we'd start fresh somewhere else. I wanted to believe her. But every night when the lights were off, I could still hear it. The scratching, the soft tapping, the voice whispering my name. It was like Sarah had followed us, like she was hiding inside the walls of this motel now, too. I lay awake one night, the bedsheets tangled around me, staring at the ceiling. The low hum of the air conditioner barely made a sound, but the silence was worse because I knew something was watching me. I could feel it. My heart beat faster with each passing minute. My mom was asleep in the other bed, her quiet breathing, a slight comfort, but I couldn't shake the feeling that Sarah was here with me. The thought made my skin crawl. Then I heard it, a soft knock on the wall beside me. My breath caught in my throat. I froze. I knew that knock. It was the same sound I'd heard in the walls of the old house on Hemlock Street. I tried to ignore it, to tell myself it was just the building settling. But then, there was another knock, and another. I couldn't move. My body felt like stone, too heavy to lift. The whispers started, faint at first, then growing louder. They were coming from the wall, from inside it, as if Sarah herself was trapped there, her voice thin and desperate. "Lily," she whispered, her voice echoing in my ears. "Come back to me. I won't let you leave. You can't escape me." Tears welled up in my eyes. I knew I had to do something, but I didn't know what. I wanted to scream for my mom, to wake her up, but the words wouldn't come. My throat felt tight, constricted. The whispers were now joined by a soft, scratching sound, like fingernails dragging across the plaster. It was close. Too close. The room felt smaller, like the walls were closing in, suffocating me. I tried to stand, but my legs wouldn't cooperate. I could feel the weight of Sarah's presence in the room pressing down on me. I could see her face now, just behind the wall, her dark eyes staring at me through the cracks. Her smile was twisted, stretched unnaturally wide, and her hair was tangled, matted with something dark. She didn't speak, but I could feel the words in my mind crawling across my skin like 1,000 tiny spiders. "Lily, come play with me," she whispered. I fought the urge to scream, the pressure building in my chest until it felt like I couldn't breathe. I had to get out. I had to leave. But where would I go? There was nowhere left to hide. Just as the darkness threatened to overwhelm me, the door to the room slammed open. I snapped my head toward the sound, and there was my mom, standing in the doorway, looking terrified but resolute. Her eyes locked onto mine, and without a word, she rushed over and pulled me into her arms. "Lily, we have to go. Now." Her voice was shaky, but I could hear the urgency in it. She didn't have to say more. I could see it in her eyes. She knew. She had heard it too. Whatever was happening, whatever was following us, was not something we could run from. We gathered our things quickly, my mind still reeling from the images of Sarah in the walls, her whispers echoing in my ears. My mom's hands trembled as she grabbed the suitcase, but there was no time to think, no time to process what had just happened. We had to get out. But as I glanced back one last time at the room, I saw it. The wall, cracked open in one spot, the shadow of a small figure just beyond the gap. My breath caught in my throat as I backed away from the room. It wasn't over. It was just beginning. We left the motel and I didn't look back. I didn't want to see her anymore, didn't want to feel her presence in the darkness. But as we drove through the night, I realized something I hadn't before. Sarah wasn't just in the house on Hemlock Street. She had never been bound by the walls of that house. She was in me. She had been in me the whole time. And no matter where we went, no matter how far we ran, I knew she would always be there, watching, waiting for the moment I would stop running. We didn't go back to Blackwater. My mom found us a small apartment in the next town over, where no one knew us, where the air didn't feel so thick with the weight of memories. We kept to ourselves, trying to put as much distance between the past and the present as possible. But no matter where we went, no matter how many walls we built around ourselves, I couldn't escape her. The whispers didn't stop. At night, when I closed my eyes, Sarah's voice was always there, low and insistent, like a memory that refused to fade. "Lily, come play with me," she would say, just like she did in that old house. Her voice was softer now, almost like a lullaby. The more I tried to ignore it, the louder it got, until it echoed in my mind, refusing to let me sleep, refusing to let me forget. My mom tried to reassure me. "It's just your imagination," she would say. "We're safe now. You're safe." But I knew better. I could feel her presence in the apartment. She was there, just out of sight, hiding in the corners of my room, slipping through the cracks in the walls. I saw the shadows move when no one else did. I heard her laugh, that eerie, hollow giggle, every time I turned off the lights. The worst part was the silence. During the day, everything felt normal. We would go to the grocery store, I would go to school, and we would pretend everything was okay. But at night, when I lay in bed, the silence was deafening. I could hear the scratching, faint at first, like nails on a chalkboard. It would start at the edge of the room and slowly move toward me. Every night it was closer. Every night it got worse. I tried to tell my mom about the noises, but she just told me to ignore it, to focus on something else. She couldn't hear it. She couldn't feel what I felt. She had convinced herself that the house on Hemlock Street had been nothing more than a bad memory, a figment of our imagination. But I knew better. One night, after another restless evening spent listening to the scratching, I couldn't take it anymore. I had to see it for myself. I had to confront whatever was lurking in the dark. I slipped out of bed, careful not to wake my mom, and crept down the hallway to the living room. The apartment was still except for the low hum of the refrigerator and the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. But as I stood there in the dark, I heard it. The tapping, the scratching. It was coming from the wall behind the bookshelf. I stepped closer, my heart pounding in my chest. The sound grew louder, more frantic. I pressed my ear to the wall, holding my breath, and then nothing. Just silence. But then, just as I was about to pull away, I heard it, a whisper, soft like a breath but clear as day. "Lily," it said, "I'm here." I stumbled back, my legs shaking, my breath catching in my throat. I didn't know what to do, what to say. I couldn't escape it. No matter where I went, she would find me. The next morning, I woke to find my mom sitting at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee, staring at the floor. She hadn't slept, I could tell. She hadn't been able to ignore it anymore either. "I heard it last night," she said quietly, her voice trembling. "The scratching, the whispers." I didn't say anything. I didn't have to. She knew. We both knew. That afternoon, we packed everything up. We couldn't stay in that apartment any longer. We couldn't stay anywhere, not while Sarah was still following us. The idea of running forever seemed pointless, like we were just prolonging the inevitable. The house, the walls, they were always going to be with us. We were always going to be trapped in her game. But before we left, I went to the backyard, the one place where I had never felt Sarah's presence before. I stood by the rusted swing set, the one where I had first seen her, and closed my eyes. I could feel her behind me, her cold presence pressing against my back like a shadow, waiting. "Come play with me," I heard her whisper again, and this time I didn't run. I turned around, and for the first time, I faced her. She stood in front of me, the same pale girl in the tattered blue dress. Her eyes were dark, black like the void, and her smile was wide, too wide, but there was something different this time. Her expression wasn't twisted with malice. It was sad, almost pleading. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice soft and broken. "I didn't mean to hurt you. I just wanted to be your friend." The wind picked up, rustling the trees in the distance. For a moment, I just stood there looking at her, feeling the weight of everything that had happened. I could feel my mom watching from the door, but I didn't turn around. I didn't want to break the moment. "You can go now," I said, my voice steady for the first time in years. "You can finally rest." Sarah's face softened, and for the first time I saw her not as a shadow, but as a lost child. She nodded, slowly, her body starting to fade, her figure becoming translucent. "Thank you," she whispered, and then she was gone. I didn't know what had happened, or if it had really happened at all, but as I stood there, feeling the weight of the moment lift, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. We left Blackwater the next day, this time for good. We didn't talk about Sarah anymore, and after a while, the whispers stopped. It was like she had finally let us go, like she had found her own peace. I don't know if Sarah will ever leave me completely. I don't know if her memory will ever fade entirely, but I do know this: I am free, and maybe, just maybe, so is she.